His hands were covered in her blood when he realized the truth. The woman dying on his stretcher, the one whose heart had stopped twice in his ambulance, was Natalie Pierce. The CEO. The signature. The reason his daughter ate cereal for dinner 3 nights a week. 3 years ago, she'd destroyed him with a single click. Tonight, Ethan Ward had a choice. Save the life of the woman who'd ruined his, or let karma take the wheel. He chose mercy. She would choose redemption. This is their story. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came down in sheets that October night, turning the streets of downtown Seattle into mirrors of neon and despair. Ethan Ward had seen worse weather during his 3 years as a paramedic, but something about tonight felt different, heavier, like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. He was right. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. Single vehicle accident, Riverside Bridge, possible fatalities. Ethan's partner, Marcus Chen, a stocky man with 15 years on the job and a perpetual coffee stain on his uniform, gunned the ambulance through the rain-slicked streets while Ethan checked their equipment for the 3rd time. It was a habit he'd developed during his engineering days, triple-check everything, because the difference between life and death often came down to a single, overlooked detail. "You're doing it again," Marcus said, glancing over. "The equipment's fine, Ward. It was fine 10 minutes ago." "Can't hurt to be sure." Ethan's voice was calm, measured. At 34, he'd learned to keep his emotions locked down tight, especially on the job. Feelings were luxuries he couldn't afford, not when he had a 7-year-old daughter waiting for him at home, counting on him to come back safe every single shift. The bridge came into view, emergency lights already painting the scene in alternating red and blue. A silver Mercedes had gone through the guardrail, its front end crumpled against the concrete barrier that separated the roadway from a 50-foot drop into the Puget Sound. Steam rose from the destroyed engine block, mixing with the rain to create an eerie fog. "Jesus," Marcus breathed. "How fast was she going?" Fast enough. Ethan was already moving, grabbing the jump bag and trauma kit before the ambulance had fully stopped. His mind shifted into that crystalline state of focus that had saved dozens of lives over the past 3 years. The same focus he'd once applied to fuel system calculations and aerospace engineering problems. Back when his life had been different. Back when he'd been different. The responding officer, a young woman who looked barely old enough to drink, stood by the wreckage, looking pale. Single occupant, female, unresponsive. Airbag deployed, but she's pinned by the steering column. Fire department's 2 minutes out. "We don't have 2 minutes." Ethan was already at the driver's side door, assessing the situation through the shattered window. The woman inside was slumped forward, held in place by her seatbelt and the collapsed dashboard. Blood matted her dark hair, running down her face in rivulets mixed with rain. Her breathing was shallow, labored, the kind of breathing that stopped being breathing very quickly if you didn't intervene. Marcus could collar and backboard. "We need to stabilize her neck before we move her." Ethan reached through the window, fingers finding the pulse point on her neck. Weak and thready, but there, for now. "Ma'am, can you hear me? My name is Ethan. I'm a paramedic. We're going to get you out of here." No response. Her eyes were closed, face slack. Not good. The next 15 minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. The fire department arrived with hydraulic cutters, the screech of metal on metal filling the night as they peeled back the car like a sardine can. Ethan never left the woman's side, one hand maintaining C-spine stabilization while the other worked, assessing pupils, checking for additional injuries, preparing for the worst. "Pupils unequal and sluggish," he called out. "Possible head trauma. Marcus, get me a line started, wide open. We need to move fast." "On it." They finally pulled her free at 12:03 a.m., 16 minutes after arrival. Ethan cradled her head as they transferred her to the backboard, his movements precise despite the rain and the adrenaline and the sick feeling in his gut that always came when a patient was this unstable. She was maybe 40, dressed in what had once been an expensive business suit, now torn and soaked with blood and rain. Diamond earrings caught the emergency lights. Whoever she was, she had money. It wouldn't save her if they didn't hurry. They loaded her into the ambulance, Marcus already on the radio calling ahead to Harborview Medical Center's trauma team. Ethan started a second IV line, fluids running wide open, when her breathing changed, became wet, rattling. She's going into respiratory distress. He reached for the intubation kit, but before he could open it, the monitor started screaming. "V-fib!" Marcus shouted. "She's coding!" Time slowed down. It always did in these moments, Ethan's brain kicking into a higher gear that made everything feel like moving through water. He'd read once that the human brain could process information 7 times faster during a crisis. He believed it. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, he'd already made his decisions, his hands already moving. Starting compressions. He positioned himself over her chest, laced his fingers together, and began the rhythmic push that might keep enough oxygen flowing to her brain to give her a chance. Marcus charged to 200. Charging. The ambulance swayed as they took a corner too fast, but Ethan's compressions never wavered. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, counting in his head, watching the monitor. V-fib was bad, the heart quivering uselessly instead of beating, but it was shockable. They could bring her back. They had to bring her back. Charged. Clear. Ethan lifted his hands. Marcus hit the button, and the woman's body convulsed as electricity slammed through her chest. For a moment, the monitor showed a normal rhythm. Then it deteriorated again. Still V-fib. Resume compressions. Ethan was back on her chest immediately, his shoulders already starting to burn. Good compressions were exhausting, and he'd been doing them for 3 minutes straight. Epi's up. Marcus, push it. Pushing. Push. His hands pressed down 2 inches deep, the exact depth that balanced effectiveness with the risk of breaking ribs. With this woman's injuries, he was probably breaking them anyway. Better broken ribs than dead. Charge to 300. Charging. "Come on," Ethan heard himself saying. "Come on, stay with me. Don't do this. Don't you dare do this." He didn't know why he was talking to her. Unconscious patients couldn't hear you, or if they could, they didn't remember. But he always talked anyway. Maybe it helped him more than it helped them. "You've got people who need you. You've got someone waiting for you at home. Come back." Charged. Clear. Another shock. Another terrible moment of suspension. And then, "We've got sinus rhythm." Marcus's voice was triumphant. "Pulse is back. She's back, Ethan." The tension in Ethan's shoulders released all at once, leaving him momentarily weak. They'd done it. She was alive. The monitor showed a steady, if rapid, heartbeat. Her breathing was still labored, but she was breathing. Crisis averted, at least for now. "Good work," he told Marcus, already moving to secure the endotracheal tube he'd placed during the chaos. "Let's get her stabilized for transport. How far out are we?" 3 minutes. "Okay. Let's keep her stable for 3 minutes. Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead, his gloves leaving a smear of blood across his skin. Just another night in the life of a Seattle paramedic. Just another stranger pulled back from the edge. He'd go home, shower off the blood and the rain, check on Maya sleeping in her room, and try to pretend he hadn't spent another night playing God with someone else's life. Except this time was different. He reached up to adjust the oxygen mask that had slipped during the resuscitation, his fingers brushing the woman's cheek as he repositioned it. Her face was still slack, still unconscious, but something about her features nagged at him. Something familiar in the sharp line of her jaw, the aristocratic nose, the dark eyebrows arched even in unconsciousness. "Marcus, can you adjust that overhead light? I need to see her face better." "Why? You know her?" "No. Maybe. I don't know." But even as he said it, Ethan was peeling back the oxygen mask slightly, angling her face toward the light, and then his entire world stopped. He knew that face. He knew those features, even bruised and bloodied as they were. He'd seen them on the news, in business magazines, in his nightmares for 3 years. The high cheekbones, the full lips, the slight cleft in her chin. But more than that, he knew her because he'd stared at her signature 1,000 times, memorized every loop and curve of the name at the bottom of the letter that had destroyed his life. Natalie Pierce, the CEO of Pierce Dynamics. The woman who'd fired him, who'd signed off on the false accusations that had cost him his engineering license, his marriage, his house, his entire future. The woman who'd reduced him from a respected aerospace engineer to a paramedic working double shifts to afford a 1-bedroom apartment for him and his daughter. The woman whose heart he'd just restarted. "Ethan, you okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus's voice seemed to come from very far away. Ethan couldn't speak, couldn't move. His hands were still on Natalie Pierce's face, still holding the oxygen mask that was keeping her alive. 3 years. 3 years he'd spent rebuilding his life from the ashes she'd left behind. 3 years of rage and bitterness and late-night fantasies about what he'd say to her if he ever got the chance. 3 years of imagining different versions of justice. And now here she was, unconscious on his stretcher, alive because he'd saved her. The irony was so sharp it cut. "Ethan!" Marcus grabbed his shoulder, shaking him slightly. "What's going on? Do you know her?" "Yeah." The word came out hoarse. "Yeah, I know her." "Who is she?" Ethan carefully replaced the oxygen mask, his movements mechanical, professional. "Natalie Pierce, CEO of Pierce Dynamics." He met Marcus's eyes, and something in his expression must have conveyed the weight of what that name meant, because Marcus's face went pale. "Oh, shit. Ethan, that's the woman who destroyed my career." "I know." Ethan looked down at his patient, because that's what she was. Just a patient, just another person who needed help, and felt something cold and bitter settle in his chest. Small world. The ambulance pulled up to the emergency bay at Harborview, and suddenly they were moving again, the doors flying open, trauma team waiting. Ethan fell back into the familiar rhythm, giving report to the attending physician while they wheeled Natalie Pierce into Trauma Room 1. Female, approximately 40 years old, single vehicle MVC with prolonged extrication, GCS-3 on arrival, unequal pupils suggesting head trauma, went into VFib at 1203, shocked twice at 200 and 300 joules, 1 milligram of EPI, achieved ROC after second shock. Current vitals: BP 90/60, heart rate 110, respirations assisted via BVM. He rattled off the details on autopilot, his brain still reeling. Around him, the trauma team swarmed over Natalie Pierce like ants, cutting away her clothes, starting more IV lines, barking orders. Someone called for a CT scan. Someone else mentioned the OR. Ethan watched it all from the doorway, feeling disconnected from his own body. "Hey." A hand touched his elbow. Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the trauma attendings he'd worked with dozens of times, looked up at him with concern. "You did good work tonight, Ethan. That woman owes you her life. If only she knew. Just doing my job, Doc." "That was more than just a job. That was a hard save." Sarah studied his face. "You look shaken. You okay?" Yeah, I'm fine." He pulled his attention away from the trauma room, away from the sight of Natalie Pierce's chest rising and falling with the ventilator. "It's been a long shift. Well, go home. Get some rest. I'll make sure she gets the best care we can give her." "Thanks." Ethan turned away, started walking toward the ambulance bay, his legs feeling like lead. Behind him, he could hear the controlled chaos of the trauma team working to stabilize their patient. His patient. The woman he'd brought back from the dead, even though part of him, a dark, bitter part he wasn't proud of, had wondered, just for a second during those compressions, what would happen if he stopped. He hadn't stopped. Of course he hadn't stopped. Because no matter what Natalie Pierce had done to him, no matter how much damage she'd caused, he wasn't the kind of person who let someone die out of spite. He was a paramedic. He saved lives. That was the job. That was the oath. That was who he'd rebuilt himself to be after she'd torn down everything else. "Patient first," he whispered to himself as he climbed back into the ambulance. Marcus was already behind the wheel, watching him with worried eyes. "You want to talk about it?" "No." "You sure? Because that was pretty heavy back there." "I'm sure." Ethan pulled off his bloody gloves, tossed them in the medical waste bin. "Let's just finish the shift." They drove in silence back to the station, through streets that were slowly emptying as the city settled into the dead hours between night and morning. Ethan stared out the window and tried not to think about Natalie Pierce, about what it meant that he'd saved her life, about the cosmic joke the universe was playing on him. He thought instead about Maya. Sweet, innocent Maya, with her gap-toothed smile and her absolute faith that her daddy was a hero. She'd asked him once, about a month after the divorce was finalized, why they'd had to move to the small apartment, why she couldn't have her old room anymore. He'd knelt down, looked into her 7-year-old eyes, so much like her mother's, and told her the truth in the simplified way you tell truth to children. Daddy lost his job, sweetheart, but it's going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Why did you lose your job? Because I tried to do the right thing, and sometimes when you do the right thing, bad people punish you for it. Maya had thought about that for a long moment, her face scrunched up in concentration. Then she'd hugged him fiercely and said, "Then you should be a hero instead. Heroes save people, and nobody can fire you for that." It had been her idea, really, that he become a paramedic. She'd seen it on a TV show and decided that was what heroes did. And Ethan, desperate for a fresh start, desperate to rebuild some sense of purpose, had looked into it. The training was intensive but shorter than going back to school for another degree. The pay was decent if you worked enough shifts, and there was something appealing about the simplicity of it. People were hurt, you helped them. Nobody cared about corporate politics or who you'd pissed off or whose bottom line you'd threatened. So he'd become a paramedic. He'd started over. He'd built a new life, a smaller life, a life that fit in a 1-bedroom apartment with a daughter who thought he hung the moon and stars. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It wasn't the life he'd worked for, studied for, sacrificed for. But it was his. And nobody could take it away from him again. Except now Natalie Pierce was back in his world, even if she didn't know it yet. Even if she never knew it. The ambulance pulled into the station at 1:30 a.m. They had another hour and a half on shift, and Ethan hoped desperately that they wouldn't get another call. He needed time to process, to think, to figure out what he was feeling. Marcus headed for the coffee maker immediately. "Want some?" "Yeah, strong." "After tonight, make it a double." They sat in the break room, paper cups of terrible coffee warming their hands, and for a long time neither of them spoke. The station was quiet around them, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic outside. Somewhere in the building, someone was snoring. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "You ever think about what you'd do if you ran into her again?" "Every day for the first year, then every week. Now," Ethan shrugged. "Now I try not to think about her at all." "But you did think about it. What did you imagine?" "Lots of things, yelling at her, making her understand what she'd done, getting some kind of acknowledgement that I was right and she was wrong." He laughed bitterly. "Stupid revenge fantasies, you know, the kind where you're perfectly eloquent and she breaks down crying and admits everything." "And tonight? What did you imagine when you realized who she was?" Ethan stared into his coffee, watching the steam rise. "Nothing. I didn't imagine anything. I just kept working, because that's what you do." "That took a lot of strength, man. Or a lot of cowardice. I could have said something, could have told the trauma team who I was, that I had a conflict of interest. Could have refused to hand her over until someone else took the case." "But you didn't." "No, I didn't. Because despite everything, despite the anger and the bitterness and the years of struggling, Ethan Ward was still a man who believed in doing the right thing, even when the right thing benefited the wrong person. Maybe especially then. I couldn't let her die, Marcus. No matter what she did to me, I couldn't just let her die." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's what makes you one of the good ones, Ethan. Even when it hurts." The radio crackled, making them both jump. But it was just dispatch checking in, seeing if they were available for calls. Marcus confirmed their status, and they settled back into silence. Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Rodriguez, his neighbor who watched Maya during his night shifts. "She's sleeping like an angel. Had another nightmare around 10, but I sang to her and she settled down. See you in the morning." Guilt twisted in his chest. Maya's nightmares had started after the divorce, after the move, after everything fell apart. She dreamed about losing him, about being alone. The therapist said it was normal for children of divorce, especially when combined with a major life change. She'd grow out of it. But in the meantime, Ethan worked his shifts and came home to a daughter who was terrified he wouldn't come back. He typed out a response. "Thank you. I'll pick her up first thing. You're a lifesaver." Lifesaver. The word mocked him. Tonight he'd saved Natalie Pierce's life, and his own daughter was at home having nightmares about abandonment. What kind of cosmic justice was that? The rest of the shift passed without incident. At 3 a.m., Ethan changed out of his uniform, showered in the station's facilities, and headed home through streets that were finally empty. Seattle in the small hours was a different city, quieter, darker, full of secrets. He drove past the hospital on his way home, couldn't help glancing at the lit windows of the trauma wing. Natalie Pierce was somewhere in there, possibly still in surgery, possibly in a medically induced coma. He wondered if she'd make it through the night. He wondered if she had family waiting for her, worried about her. He wondered if anyone at Pierce Dynamics knew their CEO was fighting for her life. And he wondered, despite himself, what would happen if she woke up? Would she remember him? Probably not. He'd been one of hundreds of employees, and 3 years was a long time. Even if she did somehow recognize him, what difference would it make? The damage was done. His career was over. His marriage was over. His old life was gone, and no amount of recognition or apology would bring it back. Better if she never knew. Better if she recovered, went back to her life, and he never saw her again. Clean break. No complications. He pulled into the parking lot of his apartment building at 3:45 a.m. The building was old, weathered, not like the modern condo he'd owned before, but it was home. He climbed the stairs to the second floor. The elevator had been broken for 2 weeks, and let himself into apartment 2B quietly, not wanting to wake Mrs. Rodriguez. But she was already awake, dozing on his couch with a book in her lap. She stirred when he entered, blinking sleepily. "Ethan, how was your shift?" "Long." He glanced toward the bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. "How was she?" "Good. The nightmare passed quickly. We read 3 chapters of Charlotte's Web, and she was out like a light." Mrs. Rodriguez stood, gathering her things. She was in her 60s, a retired teacher who'd become his saving grace when he'd moved here. "She's a strong girl, Ethan. She's going to be fine." "I hope so." He walked her to the door, pressed 2 20s into her hand despite her protests. "Thank you. I couldn't do this without you." "That's what neighbors are for." She patted his cheek maternally. "Get some sleep. You look exhausted." He was exhausted, bone deep, soul tired, exhausted. But after Mrs. Rodriguez left, Ethan found himself drawn to Maya's room instead of his own bed. He pushed open the door carefully, letting light from the hallway spill across her sleeping form. She was curled up under her favorite blanket, the purple one with stars that was starting to fray at the edges. Her dark hair spread across the pillow, her face peaceful in sleep. She looked so small, so vulnerable. His entire world, right there in a twin bed with a nightlight shaped like a moon. He'd protected her, at least. When everything else fell apart, when his marriage crumbled and his career died and his life imploded, he'd fought for custody of Maya and won. Her mother, Emily, who'd left him as soon as the money dried up, had been happy to let him have primary custody. She'd remarried within a year, moved to California with her new husband, and sent cards twice a year that Maya cherished like treasures. But Ethan was the one who packed lunches and attended parent-teacher conferences and woke up at 2 a.m. when Maya had nightmares. He was the one who'd rebuilt his life around being her father, because she was the only good thing left from the wreckage. She was his reason for getting up every morning, his reason for working double shifts, his reason for not giving up when everything felt impossible. "Did you save someone tonight, Daddy?" she'd asked him last week, her eyes wide and admiring. He'd knelt down to her level, brushed hair from her face. "Yeah, sweetheart, I did." "Tell me about them." "Well, there was a man who fell off a ladder, and a woman who had a really bad asthma attack, and a little boy about your age who broke his arm falling off his bike. Did they all live?" They all lived. Maya had hugged him then, fierce and proud. "You're the best daddy in the whole world." Standing in her doorway now, watching her sleep, Ethan felt the weight of the night pressing down on him. He'd saved Natalie Pierce. The woman who'd destroyed him was alive because of his skills, his training, his refusal to let anyone die on his watch. And when Maya woke up in the morning and asked if he'd saved someone, he'd tell her yes. He'd tell her about the car accident, about the crash victim, about bringing someone back from cardiac arrest. He wouldn't tell her who it was. That was his burden to carry alone. "Yeah, sweetheart," he whispered into the darkness. "Someone I never thought I'd save." He pulled the door mostly closed, leaving it open just enough that he'd hear if she called for him, and finally made his way to his own room. The bed was unmade, clothes scattered across the floor, the chaos of someone who worked too much and slept too little. He sat on the edge of the mattress, still wearing his jeans and t-shirt, and let his head fall into his hands. His phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from Marcus. Just heard from Sarah Chen. Pierce made it through surgery. She's stable, but critical. Thought you'd want to know. Ethan stared at the message for a long time. Stable, but critical. Alive. He'd given her that. He'd given Natalie Pierce the chance to wake up, to go back to her corner office, and her board meetings and her signature that destroyed lives. He'd given her tomorrow, even though she'd taken so many of his tomorrows away. He should feel good about it. He should feel proud that he'd chosen mercy over bitterness, that he'd lived up to the oath he'd taken when he became a paramedic. He should feel like the hero Maya believed him to be. Instead, he just felt tired. And somewhere across the city, in a hospital bed surrounded by machines and monitors, Natalie Pierce breathed in and out, unconscious of the debt she now owed, unconscious of the man who'd saved her, unconscious of the irony that would have killed a lesser person. Ethan finally lay back on the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come for hours, he knew. It never did after a hard save. His mind would replay every moment, every decision, every compression and shock and dose of medication. But tonight was different. Tonight his mind would replay the moment he'd realized who was on his stretcher, the moment he'd chosen to save her anyway. Patient first, he whispered again, the words a prayer and a curse. Always patient first. Outside, Seattle was slowly waking up. Garbage trucks rumbled through the streets. Early risers started their coffee makers. The world turned, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in emergency rooms and one-bedroom apartments. And in that space between night and morning, Ethan Ward closed his eyes and tried to find peace with what he'd done. He'd saved her life, and somehow he'd have to live with that. 3 years earlier, Ethan Ward had believed in systems. He'd believed that if you worked hard, played by the rules, and did the right thing, the system would protect you. He'd believed in corporate hierarchies and proper channels and the basic human decency of people in positions of power. He'd been an idiot. It had started on a Tuesday morning in March, unseasonably warm for Seattle. Ethan had been at his desk in the engineering department of Pierce Dynamics, reviewing fuel system specifications for the new PD-7 commercial aircraft engine. He'd been with the company for 6 years, worked his way up from junior engineer to senior systems analyst, earned respect from his colleagues and commendations from his supervisors. He'd been good at his job. No, he'd been exceptional at his job. That was why they'd assigned him to the PD-7 project in the first place. The specs had come across his desk as part of a routine quarterly review. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. Except when Ethan had run the numbers, something hadn't added up. The fuel injection pressure ratios had been modified from the original design, reduced by approximately 18%. On paper, it looked like a minor adjustment. In practice, it meant the fuel system would operate outside optimal safety parameters under certain high-stress conditions. He'd flagged it immediately, sent an email to his supervisor, David Mitchell, a man he'd worked with for 4 years and considered a friend. David had called him into his office within the hour. "Ethan, I need you to understand something." David had leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, his expression carefully neutral. "These modifications came down from the top. They're part of a cost-saving initiative that's going to save the company millions in manufacturing expenses." Cost-saving? Ethan had felt his stomach drop. "David, these modifications compromise the safety redundancies. Under extreme conditions, high altitude, low temperature, maximum thrust, the system could fail. The probability is negligible." Negligible isn't zero. We're talking about commercial aircraft. Hundreds of passengers. We can't cut corners on fuel system integrity. David had sighed, rubbed his temples. "Look, I hear you, I do. But this decision has already been made at levels way above us. The CFO himself signed off on it. Marcus Hale ran the cost-benefit analysis and determined the risk was acceptable." "Marcus Hale isn't an engineer, he's an accountant." Ethan had stood up, agitated now. "He doesn't understand the technical implications. Someone needs to explain it to him." "Someone did. Multiple people did. The decision stands." "Then I need to talk to someone higher up. The VP of engineering, the CEO. Someone who understands that we're playing with people's lives here. David's expression had shifted then, from sympathetic to something colder. Ethan, I'm going to give you some advice as a friend. Let this go. You're a good engineer with a bright future here. Don't throw it away by making waves over something that's already been decided. But Ethan hadn't let it go. He couldn't. That night, he'd gone home to the house he and Emily had bought 2 years earlier, kissed Maya goodnight, and told his wife over dinner that he might have to escalate an issue at work. Emily had looked up from her salad, concerned. What kind of issue? A safety issue. With the new engine design, they've made modifications that could be dangerous, and management doesn't want to hear it. So let someone else deal with it. Emily had always been practical, pragmatic. It was one of the things he'd loved about her, until it became one of the things he resented. That's not your job, Ethan. You review specs, you flag problems, and then it's someone else's responsibility to fix them. You did your part. But they're not fixing it. They're ignoring it. Then that's on them, not you. Don't stick your neck out. We have a mortgage. We have Maya. We have a life that depends on your job. He'd kissed her forehead, promised to be careful, and spent the next week drafting a detailed report that outlined exactly why the fuel system modifications were dangerous. He'd included calculations, stress test projections, failure analysis scenarios, 23 pages of irrefutable engineering evidence that Pierce Dynamics was cutting corners in ways that could kill people. He'd submitted it through the proper channels, CC'd his supervisor, the VP of Engineering, and the head of Product Safety. He'd followed every rule, used every proper procedure. He'd done everything right. 2 days later, Marcus Hale had called him into a conference room on the executive floor. Ethan had never met the CFO before. He'd seen him from a distance at company events. A tall man in his 50s, silver-haired and sharp-suited, with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. Up close, Marcus Hale was even more intimidating, radiating the quiet confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Mr. Ward, thank you for coming. Marcus hadn't offered to shake hands, just gestured to a chair across from him. A woman from HR was already seated at the table, her expression professionally blank. I understand you have some concerns about the PD7 fuel system design. Yes, sir. If you've read my report, I've read it thoroughly. I've also had our engineering team review your calculations, and I'm afraid they've found several errors in your analysis. Ethan had blinked, confused. Errors? That's not possible. I triple-checked everything. Nevertheless, Marcus had slid a folder across the table. These are the peer review findings. Your stress test projections were based on outdated temperature coefficients. Your failure analysis used incorrect pressure assumptions. Frankly, Mr. Ward, your report demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the systems involved. It had been like being punched in the gut. Ethan had opened the folder with shaking hands, scanned the pages inside. The review was signed by 3 senior engineers he respected, colleagues he'd worked with for years. And they were calling his work flawed, his analysis incompetent, his conclusions unfounded. This isn't right. His voice had come out hoarse. These calculations are correct. I know they're correct. And these signatures, did these engineers actually review my work? Did they actually run these numbers? The HR rep had leaned forward. Mr. Ward, are you suggesting that your colleagues are lying? I'm suggesting something's wrong here. I need to talk to these engineers directly. I need to see their calculations. That won't be necessary. Marcus's voice had gone cold. What will be necessary is for you to retract your report and issue an apology to the engineering team for wasting their time with faulty analysis. I'm not going to do that. The silence that followed had been deafening. Marcus and the HR rep had exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then Marcus had smiled, and Ethan had felt ice slide down his spine. Mr. Ward, I'm going to be very clear with you. You have 2 options. Option 1, you retract your report, acknowledge your errors, and we all move forward. You'll be reassigned to a different project, and this incident will be noted in your file as a learning experience. Option 2, you continue to insist that you're right and everyone else is wrong, in which case we'll have to seriously examine whether you have the judgment and competence to continue in your current role. Are you threatening me? I'm presenting you with choices. What you do with them is up to you. Ethan had looked at the HR rep, searching for some sign of support, some indication that this wasn't really happening, but her face remained blank, professional, offering nothing. He was alone in this room with people who'd already decided how this would end. I need time to think about it. You have until end of business today. Marcus had stood, signaling the meeting was over. Choose wisely, Mr. Ward. You have a family to think about. The threat had been clear, even unspoken. Comply or lose everything. Ethan had walked back to his desk in a daze, the folder of peer reviews clutched in his hands. His colleagues had avoided his eyes. Word had spread fast. It always did in offices like this. The man who'd challenged the CFO was now marked radioactive, someone to stay away from. He'd tried calling the engineers whose signatures were on the review. 2 hadn't answered. The third, a woman named Janet, who'd mentored him when he first joined Pierce Dynamics, had picked up, but her voice had been tight, uncomfortable. Janet, did you actually review my report? A long pause. Ethan, I can't talk about this. Just tell me if you actually ran the calculations. Please, I need to know if I'm losing my mind here. I was told to sign the review. I was told it was a formality, that senior leadership had already verified your errors. Another pause, longer this time. I'm sorry, Ethan. I have a family too. She'd hung up, and Ethan had sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen, understanding with perfect clarity that he'd already lost. They'd manufactured evidence against him, coerced his colleagues into signing false reviews, and given him an ultimatum designed to force compliance. The system he'd believed in didn't exist. It had never existed. He'd gone home that night and told Emily everything. She'd listened in growing horror, her face pale. So what are you going to do? I don't know. If I retract the report, I'm admitting to errors I didn't make. I'm letting them bury a legitimate safety concern. But if you don't, they'll fire you. You heard what he said. Emily had grabbed his hands, desperate. Ethan, please. I know this isn't fair. I know you're right. But we can't afford for you to lose your job. Maya starts school next year. We just refinanced the house. We're living paycheck to paycheck as it is. Please, just let it go. He'd looked at his wife, at her frightened eyes, and felt something break inside him. Because she was right. They couldn't afford for him to lose his job. But how could he live with himself if he backed down? How could he look at Maya and tell her to always do the right thing if he'd chosen the easy path when it mattered? I can't, Em. I'm sorry, but I can't. You mean you won't? Same thing. Emily had pulled her hands away, stood up from the table. Then you're choosing your principles over your family. I'm choosing not to let people die. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. The next morning, Ethan had walked into Marcus Hale's office and delivered his answer. He would not retract the report. He stood by his analysis, and he was requesting a formal investigation by an independent third party. Marcus had smiled that cold smile again. I was hoping you'd see reason, but I suppose some people need to learn the hard way. You're suspended, effective immediately, pending investigation into workplace conduct violations. What conduct violations? I filed a safety report through proper channels. You filed a knowingly false report that wasted company resources and damaged team morale. You refused to acknowledge documented errors in your work, and when confronted, you accused your colleagues and superiors of conspiracy. Marcus had picked up his phone. Security will escort you from the building. You'll hear from HR regarding the formal investigation process. It had been a blur after that. Security guards appearing at his desk, his colleagues watching as he was walked out like a criminal, the cardboard box of personal items clutched in his arms. The shame of it, the humiliation, had been almost worse than the injustice. 20 minutes from suspension to sidewalk, and his career at Pierce Dynamics was effectively over. The investigation had been a farce. They'd interviewed witnesses who confirmed that Ethan had become increasingly erratic and resistant to feedback. They'd presented the false peer reviews as evidence of his incompetence. They'd built a narrative of an engineer who'd made a mistake and then lashed out when confronted with his error, allowing his ego to override his judgment. Ethan had tried to fight it. He'd hired a lawyer with money he didn't have, tried to prove the peer reviews were fraudulent. But corporate lawyers were better? more expensive, more experienced at burying inconvenient truths. His colleagues, scared for their own jobs, had either refused to talk or actively testified against him. Janet had taken early retirement rather than be forced to testify, but the damage was already done. 3 weeks after his suspension, the termination letter had arrived. It was printed on heavy cream paper with the Pierce Dynamics letterhead embossed at the top. Professional, impersonal, destroying his life in 3 paragraphs. And at the bottom, above the HR director's signature, was another signature in digital blue ink. Natalie Pierce, Chief Executive Officer. She'd signed it. Whether she'd read the details or understood what she was approving didn't matter. Her name was on the paper that ended his career. Her authority backed every lie they'd told about him. Her company had manufactured evidence, coerced witnesses, and systematically destroyed him for the crime of trying to keep people safe. The aerospace industry was small, and word traveled fast. Within a month, Ethan's engineering license was under review, with Pierce Dynamics filing formal complaints about his demonstrated incompetence and ethical violations. Other companies wouldn't touch him. Recruiters stopped returning his calls. Job applications vanished into black holes. Emily had lasted another 4 months before she'd asked for a divorce. She hadn't even had the grace to be angry, just tired, disappointed, like he'd let her down by choosing to do the right thing. She'd moved back in with her parents, then met someone new with impressive speed. Someone stable. Someone who didn't risk everything on principles. The custody battle had been brutal but brief. Emily's new boyfriend had money, and she'd tried to use Ethan's instability and unemployment as evidence that he couldn't provide a suitable home for Maya. But the judge had seen through it, seen Emily for what she was, a woman who'd abandoned her marriage the moment things got difficult. Ethan had won primary custody, though it felt like a Pyrrhic victory considering he had no job and no prospects. He'd sold the house, split the proceeds with Emily, and watched 6 years of equity vanish. The small apartment in a not-great neighborhood was all he could afford. Maya's private preschool became public school. Date nights and family vacations became ramen dinners and library trips. Everything they'd built together crumbled away, and Ethan had no one to blame but himself. Except that wasn't true, was it? He had someone to blame. He had an entire company to blame, led by a woman whose signature had made it all official. For a while, the anger had kept him going. He'd spent nights researching Natalie Pierce, reading every article and interview, learning about the woman who'd destroyed him. She was 41 years old, had inherited Pierce Dynamics from her father 4 years earlier after his death from a heart attack. She'd been COO before that, groomed from birth to take over the family business. MBA from Stanford, ruthlessly efficient, known for her focus on profitability and growth. She gave speeches about leadership and innovation. She'd been profiled in Fortune and Forbes. She sat on boards and donated to charities and presented herself as a visionary CEO, bringing Pierce Dynamics into the future. Nowhere in any of those glowing profiles was there mention of the safety concerns her company had buried, or the engineer whose life they'd destroyed to keep their quarterly earnings looking good. Ethan had fantasized about confronting her. He'd imagined showing up at her office, demanding an audience, forcing her to look him in the eye while he explained exactly what her signature had done. He'd imagined her breaking down, admitting guilt, offering compensation. He'd imagined justice in 1,000 different forms, each more satisfying than the last. But fantasies didn't pay rent or buy groceries or put clothes on Maya's back. So Ethan had swallowed his rage, packed it down deep where it couldn't hurt him, and looked for a way forward. The paramedic certification had been Maya's idea, but it had been his salvation. 8 months of intensive training, EMT certification first, then paramedic. It was humbling, starting over in a field where his engineering degree meant nothing, where he was the oldest student in most of his classes. But it was honest work, and honest work was what he needed. 3 years had passed since that termination letter. 3 years of rebuilding, of learning to be satisfied with less, of finding purpose in saving strangers instead of designing engines. He'd made peace with it, mostly. The anger had faded to a dull ache that he could ignore most days. He'd moved on. Until last night, when the past had literally crashed into his present, and he'd found himself performing chest compressions on the woman whose signature had ruined his life. Now, as morning light crept through the blinds of his apartment, Ethan lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, running through it all again. The choices he'd made. The choices made for him. The cosmic joke of saving Natalie Pierce's life. "Daddy?" Maya's voice came from the doorway, sleepy and soft. "Are you awake?" He turned his head, managed a smile. "Hey, sweetheart. Yeah, I'm awake. Come here." She padded across the room in her princess pajamas, a birthday gift from Emily that was already getting too small, and climbed into bed next to him. She smelled like lavender shampoo and childhood innocence, and Ethan pulled her close, grateful for this one pure thing in his complicated life. "Did you save people last night?" The question was inevitable. She asked it every morning after his night shifts, her voice full of pride and wonder. Usually he loved telling her stories, editing out the gore and the trauma, giving her sanitized versions that let her believe her daddy was a hero. Today, the words stuck in his throat. "Yeah, baby, I saved someone. Tell me about them." How could he? How could he explain to his 7-year-old daughter that he'd saved the woman responsible for their reduced circumstances, for the divorce, for everything that had changed their lives? How could he make her understand the bitter irony without burdening her with adult complications she was too young to process? "It was a car accident," he said carefully. "A woman crashed her car, and she was hurt very badly. Her heart stopped, and I had to do CPR to bring her back." Maya's eyes went wide. "You brought her back to life?" "In a way, yeah." "That's amazing, Daddy. Is she going to be okay?" "I don't know yet. She was still in the hospital when I left, but I did everything I could for her." "I bet she's going to be okay, because you're the best paramedic ever." Maya snuggled closer, absolute faith radiating from her small body. "She's going to wake up and tell everyone how you saved her life, and everyone will know what a hero you are." The words were knives. Sweet, innocent knives wielded by his daughter who believed the world was fundamentally just, that heroes were always recognized, that doing good always led to good outcomes. He'd tried so hard to preserve that innocence for her, even as his own illusions had been shattered. "Come on," he said, tickling her side to change the subject. "Let's make pancakes. Mrs. Rodriguez said you were good last night." "I only had one nightmare." "That's great, sweetie. I'm proud of you." They made pancakes together in the tiny kitchen, Maya standing on a stool to help pour batter, getting more on the counter than in the pan. Ethan let her make the mess, let her chatter about school and her friends and the book they were reading in class. Normal things, safe things. Things that had nothing to do with Natalie Pierce or Pierce Dynamics, or the complicated weight of saving someone who'd destroyed you. His phone rang while they were eating. Marcus Chen's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, hold on." Ethan stepped into the living room, away from Maya's curious ears. "Marcus, what's up?" "Wanted to give you an update on last night's patient. Natalie Pierce. She made it through the night. They've got her in a medically induced coma to reduce brain swelling, but the neurosurgeon is cautiously optimistic." Relief and resentment warred in Ethan's chest. "That's good. There's more. Apparently she's a big deal. Like, really big deal. The hospital administrator showed up personally to oversee her care. There are reporters outside the hospital. It's a whole thing." "I'm sure it is." "Ethan," Marcus's voice dropped. "Are you doing okay with this? I know it's complicated." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Nobody would be fine with this. You want to grab coffee later? Talk it through?" "Thanks, but I've got Maya today. Maybe another time." He ended the call and stood in the living room, looking at nothing. Natalie Pierce was going to survive. She was going to wake up, recover, go back to her life of power and influence. And she'd never know how close she'd come to dying, or who'd saved her, or what it had cost him to do it. Maybe that was better. Maybe it was better if their paths never crossed again, if she remained ignorant of the debt she owed, if he could file last night away as just another call, just another patient, nothing special. Except it wasn't just another call, and he couldn't pretend otherwise. "Daddy, your pancakes are getting cold." Maya's voice pulled him back to the present, to the one thing that mattered more than his complicated history with Natalie Pierce. He went back to the kitchen, sat down with his daughter, and ate cold pancakes while she told him about the science project she wanted to do on butterflies. He listened, nodded, asked questions, and tried to be present for her even as his mind kept drifting back to the hospital, to the woman in the medically induced coma, to the choices he'd made and the choices still to come. His phone rang again that afternoon. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Ward? This is Dr. Sarah Chen from Harborview. I'm calling about Natalie Pierce." His stomach dropped. "Is she okay? Did something happen?" "No, she's stable. But I'm calling because she's starting to wake up. And when patients wake up from traumatic events, we like to have the first responders available if possible. It can help with their recovery to meet the people who saved them. I know it's a lot to ask, especially given your history with her, but would you be willing to come in?" "My history with her?" Ethan's voice came out sharp. "What do you know about my history with her?" "Only what Marcus told me, that she's the CEO of the company that fired you." "I'm sorry, Ethan. I wouldn't ask if I didn't think it might help her recovery, but I understand completely if you need to decline." He should decline. He should tell Dr. Chen that he'd done his job, saved Natalie Pierce's life, and that was where his obligation ended. Seeing her again, talking to her, letting her thank him, it would be torture. It would be salt in wounds that had barely healed. "When?" The word came out before he could stop it. "Tomorrow afternoon, around 2 o'clock. She should be conscious by then." "I'll be there." He hung up and immediately wondered what he'd just agreed to. Maya was watching him from the couch where she'd been coloring, her crayon paused mid-stroke. "Who was that?" "Work stuff, sweetheart. Nothing important." But it was important. It was maybe the most important thing that had happened to him in 3 years. Tomorrow he'd see Natalie Pierce conscious, awake, alive because of him. Tomorrow he'd have to look into the eyes of the woman who'd destroyed his career and accept her gratitude. Tomorrow he'd have to decide whether to tell her the truth or let her remain ignorant of exactly who had saved her life. He'd told Dr. Chen he'd be there. But as the afternoon faded into evening, as he and Maya made dinner and watched a movie and went through their bedtime routine, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a terrible mistake. Some doors were better left closed. Some debts were better left unacknowledged. But he'd said yes, and Ethan Ward, despite everything, was still a man who kept his word. The next morning arrived too quickly. Ethan had barely slept, his mind churning through imaginary conversations, rehearsing what he might say or not say when he faced Natalie Pierce. By the time Maya woke up, he'd already been through 3 pots of coffee and felt wired, jittery, like his skin was too tight for his body. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived at noon to watch Maya, giving Ethan a knowing look that suggested she sensed something was off, but was too polite to pry. He kissed his daughter goodbye, promised to be home for dinner, and drove to Harborview with his hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to make his knuckles white. The hospital looked different in daylight, less urgent, more institutional. He parked in the visitor lot and sat in his truck for 10 minutes, watching people come and go through the main entrance. Families visiting loved ones, medical staff on their breaks, normal people living normal lives, none of them carrying the weight of the choice he was about to make. Tell her or don't tell her? Those were his options. He could walk into her room, accept her thanks, and leave without ever revealing that they had history. She'd never know who he was, and he could go back to his life with this strange chapter closed. Or he could tell her the truth that the man who saved her life was the same man she'd helped destroy 3 years ago. Force her to confront what she'd done. Make her see him as a person instead of a line item in a termination report. Neither option felt right. Both felt necessary. He was still sitting in his truck when his phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Chen. "She's awake and asking about you. Room 437. No more delays, no more rehearsals." It was time. Ethan climbed out of the truck and walked across the parking lot on legs that felt distant from his body, like he was piloting himself from somewhere far away. The automatic doors slid open with a mechanical sigh. The lobby smelled like disinfectant and coffee from the Starbucks kiosk near the elevators. Everything was so ordinary, so mundane, when it should have felt momentous. The elevator ride to the 4th floor took forever and no time at all. The doors opened onto the cardiac care unit, all hushed voices and beeping monitors. A nurse at the station looked up as he approached. "I'm Ethan Ward. Dr. Chen asked me to come see Natalie Pierce." The nurse's expression shifted to something like respect. "Oh, you're the paramedic who saved her. She's been asking about you. Room 437 down the hall on the left." "But Mr. Ward?" The nurse lowered her voice. "Go easy on her. She's still very fragile, and she doesn't remember much about the accident yet." He nodded, not trusting his voice, and walked down the hallway. Each step felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff. Room 435, room 436, and then room 437, the door partially open, late afternoon light streaming through the window inside. Ethan stood outside that door for a long moment, his heart hammering in his chest. On the other side was Natalie Pierce, awake, alive, waiting to thank him. He could still turn around, could tell Dr. Chen he'd changed his mind, could walk away and never look back. Instead, he took a deep breath and knocked softly on the doorframe. "Come in." The voice was weak, hoarse from the breathing tube, but unmistakably hers. The same voice he'd heard in video interviews, making speeches about innovation and leadership. Now it was just tired and human. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Natalie Pierce looked like hell. That was his first thought, uncharitable but true. Her dark hair was matted against the pillow, her face pale and bruised, a bandage wrapped around her head. IV lines snaked from both arms. The hospital gown made her look smaller, more vulnerable than the powerful CEO in the designer suits from his memories. But her eyes, dark brown, intelligent, tracked him as he entered, and there was something in them that suggested the force of personality that had built an empire wasn't diminished by the physical trauma. "You must be Ethan Ward." She tried to smile, winced at the effort. "The nurse said you were coming." "Ms. Pierce." He stayed near the door, not trusting himself to come closer. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," which I suppose is close to the truth. She shifted slightly in the bed, trying to sit up more, and he saw her wince again. "The doctors tell me I died, that my heart stopped, and you brought me back. I did my job." "Your job." She studied him with those sharp eyes, and for a terrifying moment he thought she recognized him, but then she shook her head slightly. "The nurses tell me I'm only alive because of your quick thinking, that most paramedics wouldn't have been able to stabilize me in the field. I owe you my life, Mr. Ward." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with irony she couldn't see. She owed him her life after taking his. "You don't owe me anything. Like I said, I was doing my job." "Still, I want to thank you properly. Once I'm out of here, once I'm back on my feet, I'd like to do something for you. A reward, or a commendation, or—" "That's not necessary." His voice came out harder than he'd intended. "I don't need anything from you." Natalie's expression flickered, confused by his tone. Have we met before? You seem familiar somehow." This was it, the moment of decision. Tell her or don't tell her. "No," he heard himself say. "We haven't met." The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. But what was the alternative? Unload 3 years of pain onto a woman who just survived a near-death experience? Demand acknowledgement and apology from someone who probably didn't even remember signing his termination letter? It wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't give him back his career or his marriage or the life he'd lost. "Are you sure? Because I feel like I know you from somewhere." She was still studying his face, trying to place him, and panic rose in Ethan's throat. "I'm sure. Seattle's not that big a city. Maybe you've just seen me around." He took a step backward toward the door. "I should go. I'm glad you're recovering, Ms. Pierce. Take care of yourself." "Wait." She held up a hand, stopped him. "Please, I know you said you don't need anything, but could you tell me what happened? The accident. I don't remember any of it. The doctors say that's normal, that traumatic memories sometimes don't form. But it's frightening, having this gap in my mind. Can you help me fill it in?" He should refuse. He should walk out that door and never come back. But there was something in her voice, a vulnerability he hadn't expected, that made him pause. "What do you remember?" he asked. "I remember leaving the office. It was late, maybe 10:30. I'd been working on quarterly reports. I remember getting in my car, starting to drive home." She closed her eyes, concentrating. And then nothing. Next thing I knew, I was waking up here with tubes everywhere and a doctor telling me I'd been in an accident. You went off Riverside Bridge. Single vehicle accident, no other cars involved. Your car hit the guardrail hard enough to deploy the airbags, but you were pinned. We had to wait for fire department to extract you. And my heart stopped. Twice. Once in the ambulance, once in the ER. We got you back both times. She opened her eyes, looked at him with something like awe. You saved my life twice. The ER team saved you the second time. I just kept you alive long enough to get you there. You're very modest for a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm a paramedic who did his job. The words came out sharp again, and he saw her flinch. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be rude. It's just, it was a difficult night. Of course. I'm sorry. I'm sure you see terrible things all the time. She paused, then added quietly, Thank you. Even if you don't want to hear it, even if you think it was just your job, thank you. Whatever life I have left to live, I have it because of you. The irony of it threatened to choke him. He managed a nod, couldn't form words, and turned to leave. His hand was on the door handle when she spoke again. Mr. Ward, why do I feel like you're angry with me? He froze, turned back slowly. I'm not angry with you. Yes, you are. I can hear it in your voice, see it in your body language. If we've never met, if I've done nothing to you, then why does it feel like you hate me? She was more perceptive than he'd given her credit for. Too perceptive. The smart thing would be to deflect, to make excuses and leave. But standing there in her hospital room, looking at this woman who had no idea what she'd done to him, Ethan felt 3 years of suppressed rage begin to crack through his careful composure. You really don't remember me, do you? Natalie's expression shifted, became wary. Should I? 3 years ago, Pierce Dynamics. I filed a safety report about the PD-7 fuel system. Your CFO buried it, manufactured evidence against me, and had me fired. You signed the termination letter. The color drained from her already pale face. What? My name is Ethan Ward. I was a senior systems analyst in your engineering department. I found a safety flaw in your new engine design, a flaw your company chose to ignore because fixing it would have cost money. When I wouldn't drop it, I was fired. My career was destroyed. My marriage ended. I lost everything. He took a step toward her, saw her shrink back slightly. And you signed the letter that made it official. So no, Ms. Pierce, we haven't formally met, but you ruined my life 3 years ago. And 2 nights ago, I saved yours anyway. The silence that followed was absolute. Natalie stared at him, her face a mask of shock and dawning horror. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Ethan Ward. Oh my God. I remember the name. There was a termination. Legal recommended it. HR said there were performance issues, insubordination. She pressed a hand to her mouth. I signed it. I didn't read the file. I trusted the process. I signed so many documents that week. You never thought about the person whose life you were destroying. I was just paperwork to you. I'm so sorry. Tears were streaming down her face now. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. If I'd known... What? What would you have done differently? The anger he'd been holding back for 3 years poured out now, unstoppable. Would you have actually read the file? Would you have questioned why a respected engineer was suddenly accused of incompetence? Would you have investigated whether the evidence against me was real? Yes, I would have. I swear I would have. Ethan, Mr. Ward, please, you have to believe me. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I trusted my CFO. I trusted the system. I thought you thought wrong. Your CFO was corrupt. The peer reviews were falsified, and I was telling the truth about the safety flaw. But none of that mattered because I was just an inconvenient line item in your profit margins. Natalie was openly crying now, her whole body shaking. Monitors around her bed started beeping, alarms triggered by her elevated heart rate. A nurse rushed in, took one look at the situation, and glared at Ethan. Mr. Ward, you need to leave. Now, you're upsetting the patient. I'm going. He looked at Natalie one more time, saw her broken and sobbing, and felt no satisfaction, just exhaustion. I'm glad you survived, Ms. Pierce. I really am, because I'm not the kind of person who lets someone die, even when they deserve it. But stay out of my life. I did my job. You're alive, and we're done here." He walked out before she could respond, before the nurse could say anything else, before the weight of what he'd just done could fully register. The hallway seemed to stretch forever. The elevator took an eternity. By the time he reached the parking lot, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely get his keys out of his pocket. He sat in his truck and put his head against the steering wheel and tried to breathe. He'd told her. He'd actually told her. 3 years of imagining that confrontation, and it had happened, and it felt empty, not satisfying, not cleansing, just empty, like opening a wound that had finally started to heal. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Chen. "What the hell did you say to her? She's inconsolable." He didn't respond. What could he say? That he'd unloaded 3 years of trauma onto a woman who was still recovering from nearly dying? That he'd made her cry in her hospital bed? That he'd broken every rule of professionalism and basic human decency because he couldn't let go of the past? He drove home in a daze, barely seeing the road. Mrs. Rodriguez took one look at his face when he walked in and ushered Maya into her bedroom to play, giving him privacy he didn't deserve. He collapsed onto the couch and stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what he'd just done. Had he wanted to hurt Natalie Pierce? Yes, if he was being honest. Part of him had wanted to see her suffer the way he'd suffered, had wanted her to understand the consequences of her careless signature, had wanted something, anything, that felt like justice. But seeing her break down, seeing her cry and beg for forgiveness, it hadn't felt like justice. It had felt cruel. She was already broken, already suffering, already paying a price for her mistakes even if she hadn't known what they were. And he'd kicked her while she was down. What kind of man did that make him? His phone rang. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello? Mr. Ward?" A child's voice, small and uncertain. "My name is Maya. No, that's your Maya. I'm a different Maya. I'm calling because, are you the man who saved Ms. Pierce?" Ethan sat up, confused. "Who is this?" "I'm nobody important, but Ms. Pierce is important. She's really important. And I heard what happened, and I just wanted to say thank you for saving her because she's a really good person, and the world needs her, and..." The voice broke, started crying. "Please don't hate her, please. Whatever she didn't mean it. She's just trying so hard to be good enough, and she's so tired, and..." "Wait, slow down. Who are you? How did you get my number?" "I'm just a kid, nobody. But I know Miss Pierce, and she's been so sad, and she tries so hard, and she doesn't deserve more pain, so please, please be kind to her. Please give her a chance." The line went dead. Ethan stared at his phone, completely bewildered. A child calling to defend Natalie Pierce? It didn't make sense unless... He thought about Natalie Pierce's file, the things he'd learned during his angry research 3 years ago. She'd never married, no children listed in any of her biographies. But there had been mentions of charity work, mentorship programs, something about a foundation her father had started. Who was this child? And why did she care so much about Natalie Pierce? Before he could process it further, his phone rang again. This time he recognized the number, the hospital. "Mr. Ward, this is Dr. Chen. I need you to come back to the hospital. It's about Natalie Pierce." His stomach dropped. "What happened? Is she okay?" "She's stable, but she's asking for you, begging for you, actually. She says she has to see you again, that she has something important to tell you. I know this is complicated. I know you're not obligated, but she's getting increasingly agitated, and it's not good for her recovery." I told her everything I needed to say, and maybe she needs to tell you everything she needs to say. Please, Ethan, just one more conversation. After that, if you want to walk away forever, I'll respect that. He should say no. He should tell Dr. Chen that he'd already given Natalie Pierce more than she deserved, that he'd saved her life, and that was enough. He should protect himself, maintain boundaries, refuse to be drawn back into her orbit. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He had no idea why he agreed. Maybe because of the mysterious phone call from the child who'd defended Natalie so passionately. Maybe because Dr. Chen was right and Natalie deserved a chance to respond. Maybe because some part of him wasn't done with this yet, wasn't ready to walk away with everything still unresolved. Mrs. Rodriguez agreed to stay with Maya through dinner. Ethan drove back to the hospital as the sun began its descent toward the Olympic Mountains, painting Seattle in shades of gold and amber. The city looked beautiful, serene, nothing like the turmoil churning in his gut. Room 437 looked different when he entered the second time. The lights were dimmed and Natalie was sitting up more, though she looked exhausted. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was something else in her expression now, determination, maybe, or resolve. "You came back," she said quietly. "Dr. Chen said you wanted to see me." "I did. I do. Please, sit down. I know you don't want to be here. I know you hate me, but please, just give me 5 minutes. That's all I ask." Ethan remained standing near the door, arms crossed. 5 minutes. Natalie took a shaky breath. "After you left, I called my office. Had my assistant send over every file related to your termination. Everything. The original safety report you filed, the investigation documents, the peer reviews, all of it." She reached for a tablet on the bedside table, her hands trembling. "I read it all, every word. And you were right. About everything." "I know I was right. The peer reviews were falsified. The evidence against you was manufactured, and your safety concerns were legitimate. I found the original engineering analysis you submitted. It was thorough, professional, correct in every detail." She looked at him with eyes full of pain. Marcus Hale buried it all. He created a false narrative, coerced your colleagues, and orchestrated your termination. And I signed off on it without question because I trusted him. I trusted the system. I failed you in the most fundamental way a CEO can fail an employee. So you admit it. I admit it. Completely. You were destroyed because I was lazy and careless and too focused on quarterly earnings to pay attention to what was happening in my own company. I signed your termination letter without reading your file. I ended your career with a click of a mouse, and I didn't even know your face. Tears were streaming down her cheeks again. There's no excuse for that. None. I was the CEO. The responsibility was mine, and I failed you catastrophically. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't the defensive corporate response he'd expected. This wasn't denial or justification. This was raw acknowledgement, painful and honest. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to hear it. Because you saved my life even though I ruined yours. Because—" She paused, struggling with the words. "Because I've spent 3 years trying to be the CEO my father wanted me to be. And I didn't realize I'd become someone who cared more about spreadsheets than people. Someone who'd destroy a man's life without even looking at his face. I don't want to be that person anymore. It's a little late for that. I know it's too late to undo what I did to you, but it's not too late to make sure it never happens to anyone else." She set the tablet aside, met his eyes directly. "I'm calling for a full independent investigation into Marcus Hale and every termination he's been involved in. I'm implementing new oversight procedures for HR decisions. And I'm personally reviewing every active safety concern that's been filed in the past 5 years to make sure nothing else has been buried." Ethan stared at her, trying to process what he was hearing. "You're investigating your own CFO?" "I'm exposing corruption in my own company. Even if it destroys Pierce Dynamics. Even if it destroys me. Because you were right, and you were punished for it, and that can never happen again." "Why? Why would you do that? It's going to cost you millions. It's going to damage your reputation. You could just let it go. Pay me off, sign an NDA, move on." Because that's what the old Natalie would have done. The Natalie who signed your termination without reading it. The Natalie who cared more about protecting the company than protecting people. She wiped at her tears, her jaw set. "But I died 3 days ago. My heart stopped, and you brought me back. Maybe I'm supposed to do something with this second chance. Maybe I'm supposed to be better." The 5 minutes had stretched to 10, then 15. Ethan found himself sitting in the chair beside her bed, listening as Natalie told him about her father, about the impossible weight of inheriting Pierce Dynamics, about the pressure to maintain profitability and growth at all costs. She told him about sleepless nights and board meetings where she was the only woman in the room and the constant fear that she wasn't good enough, wasn't ruthless enough, wasn't her father. He built this company from nothing, she said quietly. Died at his desk working on a merger that would have doubled our market share. I was 37 when I became CEO, and everyone expected me to fail, so I worked harder, pushed harder, cut costs and drove profits, and did everything I thought he would have done. She laughed bitterly. I didn't realize I was cutting out my own humanity in the process. Your father would have read the file, Ethan heard himself say. I met him once at a company event. He stopped to talk to every engineer in the room, knew our names, our projects. He cared about the work, not just the profits. I know he would have. That's what makes this worse. I failed him too. She looked at Ethan with something like desperation. I can't undo what I did to you. I can't give you back those 3 years. But I can try to make things right going forward. Will you help me? Help you? Help you how? Come back to Pierce Dynamics, not as an employee. I understand if you never want to work for me again, but as a consultant. Help me root out the corruption. Help me make sure the safety protocols are real and enforced. Help me rebuild the company into something my father would have been proud of. She took a shaky breath. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm asking you to help me stop this from happening to anyone else. Ethan leaned back in the chair, his mind reeling. Come back to Pierce Dynamics? Work with Natalie Pierce? It was insane. It was impossible. It was a chance to actually fix the system that had destroyed him. Not just get revenge, not just receive acknowledgement, but actually prevent this from happening to other engineers who dared to speak up. To make real change instead of just nursing his wounds. I need time to think about it. Of course. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. She smiled weakly. Apparently I'm going to be in this hospital for another week at least. He stood up, preparing to leave. At the door he paused. That phone call earlier. From a child asking me not to hate you. Who was that? Natalie's expression softened. Maya. It's complicated. There's a mentorship program I run through my father's foundation. Maya's mother died 2 years ago, and she was placed in foster care. I've been her mentor since then. She's a sweet kid, too sweet for the life she's had. Another Maya. Another little girl who needed protection. Ethan felt something crack in his chest. She said you try so hard, that you're tired, that you don't deserve more pain. She's very protective of me. I don't deserve that either. Natalie looked away. I'm sorry she called you. She shouldn't have done that. No, it's fine. She cares about you. That says something. It says she's a good kid who doesn't know better. Natalie met his eyes again. But I want to be worthy of her faith. I want to be the person she thinks I am. That's why I need to do this. That's why I need to make things right. Ethan nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. He left without another word, but this time the emptiness he'd felt earlier was replaced by something else. Not forgiveness. He wasn't ready for that. But maybe understanding. Maybe the beginning of something like resolution. He drove home through gathering darkness, his mind churning. Mrs. Rodriguez had already left, leaving a note that Maya was fed and ready for bed. He found his daughter in her room, coloring a picture of a butterfly. Daddy, you're home. Did you save more people? He sat down on the edge of her bed, pulled her into a hug. No, baby. Today I just talked to someone. Someone I saved before. Did they say thank you? Yeah, they did. He kissed the top of her head, breathed in the lavender scent of her shampoo. They said thank you. That night, after Maya was asleep, Ethan sat at his small kitchen table and spread out the documents he'd kept from his termination. The letter with Natalie's signature, copies of his safety report, everything he'd saved as evidence of the injustice done to him. He'd looked at these papers hundreds of times over the past 3 years, fuel for his anger and his grief. Now he looked at them with different eyes, not as proof of victimhood, but as evidence of systemic failure, not as his personal tragedy, but as a symptom of a larger disease. Natalie Pierce had been right about one thing. This couldn't happen to anyone else. And if he had a chance to make sure it didn't, maybe he had to take it. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Natalie. Got your number from hospital records. Hope that's okay. I meant what I said. However long it takes, whatever it costs, I'll make this right. You have my word. Ethan stared at the message for a long time. Then, slowly, he typed out a response. I'll think about your offer, but if I do this, it's on my terms. Complete transparency, full access to all company records, and you follow every recommendation I make regarding safety protocols, no exceptions. The response came back immediately. Deal. Whatever you need. Thank you for even considering it. He set his phone down and looked at his daughter's butterfly drawing on the refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a star. Maya believed he was a hero. Maybe it was time to be the kind of hero who didn't just save lives in ambulances, but who prevented the disasters that created victims in the first place. He'd saved Natalie Pierce's life. Now maybe they could save each other. 2 weeks later, Ethan stood outside the Pierce Dynamics headquarters for the first time in 3 years. The building looked exactly the same, glass and steel reaching toward the Seattle sky, the company logo gleaming in the morning sun. But everything else had changed. Last time he'd been here, security had escorted him out with a box of personal items and his career in ruins. Today he was walking back in as a consultant with full access and Natalie Pierce's backing. He still wasn't sure this was the right decision. You can do this, Daddy. Maya had told him that morning over breakfast, her gap-toothed smile full of confidence he didn't feel. You're going to help people. That's what heroes do. Mrs. Rodriguez had been less enthusiastic. Are you sure about this, Ethan? Going back to the place that hurt you so badly? No, he'd admitted, but I have to try. Now standing on the sidewalk with people streaming past him into the building, Ethan took a deep breath and pulled out his phone. A text from Natalie waited. I'm in the lobby. Whenever you're ready, no pressure. There was always pressure. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe pressure was what forged steel from iron, made diamonds from carbon. Maybe pressure was what turned broken people into something stronger. He walked through the revolving doors. The lobby was exactly as he remembered. Soaring ceilings, marble floors, a sculpture that probably cost more than his annual salary. But the receptionist was different, younger, and she smiled at him without recognition. Why would she recognize him? He was just another consultant in a building full of them. Natalie was waiting near the elevators, and Ethan barely recognized her. She'd been released from the hospital 4 days ago, and though the bruises had faded to yellow-green and the bandage was gone from her head, she looked different in ways that had nothing to do with physical healing. She wore a simple pantsuit instead of the designer power clothes from her corporate photos, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. And there was something in her eyes, a wariness maybe, or a determination that hadn't been there in the pictures he'd studied during his angry research. Ethan, she approached cautiously, like he might bolt at any moment. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it. And I'm here. But I meant what I said. Full transparency, complete access, and you implement every safety recommendation I make. Agreed. She pressed the elevator button, and they rode up in silence that felt heavy with unspoken history. Other employees got on at various floors, and Ethan noticed how they all seemed to shrink slightly in Natalie's presence, how their smiles became just a little forced, fear or respect. Probably both. He'd seen it before in his engineering days, the way people acted around executives who held their careers in their hands. They got off on the executive floor, and Natalie led him past her assistant's desk, a young man who looked up with obvious concern when he saw Ethan, and into her corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Elliott Bay, a desk that probably cost more than his truck. Photographs on the credenza showing Natalie with various dignitaries and business leaders, all of them smiling the fake smiles of networking events. This is where you signed my termination letter, Ethan said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Natalie flinched. Yes. I was sitting right there reviewing documents Marcus had flagged as urgent. Yours was buried in a stack of 12 other terminations that quarter. I spent maybe 30 seconds on it. Clicked approve, moved on to the next. She walked to the window, stared out at the water. I've spent the past 2 weeks thinking about that. 30 seconds. That's all your career was worth to me. 30 seconds and a mouse click. Is there a point to this trip down memory lane, or are we actually going to do something productive? She turned to face him, and he saw tears in her eyes that she blinked away quickly. The point is that I want you to understand how ashamed I am, how angry I am at myself. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know that I see what I did. I see it clearly now. Seeing it doesn't change it. No, but maybe doing something about it can. She moved to her desk, pulled out a thick folder. These are all the files related to Marcus Hale's activities over the past 5 years. Every cost-cutting initiative, every terminated employee, every buried safety concern. I've been reviewing them every night since I got home from the hospital. The pattern is clear once you know what to look for. He's been systematically prioritizing short-term profits over long-term safety and stability. Ethan took the folder, flipped through the pages. Dozens of names he didn't recognize, all with termination dates within weeks of filing safety or ethics complaints. Jesus, how many? 47 that we've found so far, and those are just the ones who filed formal complaints. How many more just kept their heads down and stayed quiet? How many potential disasters are we sitting on because good engineers were too scared to speak up? He sank into one of the leather chairs facing her desk, the weight of the folder heavy in his hands. 47 people. 47 careers destroyed, families disrupted, lives derailed. And he'd been just one of them. Not special, not unique, just another inconvenient truth that Marcus Hale had buried. So what's the plan? He asked. You can't just fire him without evidence that will hold up legally. He'll lawyer up, claim wrongful termination, tie you in court for years. I know. That's why I need your help. Natalie sat in the chair next to him instead of behind her desk. A deliberate choice that didn't escape his notice. Equal footing, not boss and subordinate. I need someone who understands the technical side, who can review these cases and identify the real safety issues versus the manufactured ones. Someone who can build an airtight case that even Marcus's lawyers can't fight. And you think that someone is me? I know it is. You proved it 3 years ago when you filed that report on the PD-7. You were right then, Ethan. Let's prove you were right in a way that makes sure this never happens again. He wanted to say no. Wanted to throw the folder in her face and walk out. This was too much, too complicated, too close to the pain he'd spent 3 years trying to move past. But then he thought about 47 other people who'd been where he was, and how many more might follow if nothing changed. I need full access to the engineering databases, all safety reports filed in the past 5 years, personnel files for everyone Marcus was involved in terminating, and I need to talk to the engineers whose names are in here, the ones who are still alive and willing to talk. Done. I'll have East set up your credentials today. You'll have higher access than anyone except me. Natalie pulled out her phone, started typing. And I'll reach out personally to every name in that folder, explain what we're doing, offer to meet with them if they're willing. They're not going to trust you. You're the CEO who signed off on their terminations. I know, that's why you're going to be there with me. You're living proof that I'm serious about this, that I'm willing to face the people I hurt. She looked at him directly. I can't undo the past, but I can stand up and own it, and I can fight like hell to make sure the future is different. The next 3 days were a blur. Ethan set up in a small conference room down the hall from Natalie's office, walls covered in printouts and sticky notes as he began to map out the pattern of Marcus Hale's corruption. The engineering databases confirmed what he'd suspected. Almost every terminated employee had filed legitimate safety concerns in the weeks before their dismissal, and in every case, peer reviews had mysteriously appeared supporting the termination, signed by engineers who later admitted they'd been pressured or had never actually reviewed the work. Janet Chen, the engineer who'd called him 3 years ago to apologize, was one of the first people Natalie contacted. She agreed to meet them at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory away from Pierce dynamics. She looked older than Ethan remembered, more worn, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. Ethan, oh my God, I heard what happened, that you saved Natalie's life, and now this. She gestured at both of them sitting together. I don't understand. Neither do I, honestly, Ethan admitted, but we're trying to build a case against Marcus Hale. We need people willing to testify about the pressure, the falsified reviews, all of it. Janet looked at Natalie, her expression conflicted. Why should I trust you? You fired me too. Well, technically I took early retirement, but we both know that was just a polite way of saying I was forced out. You shouldn't trust me, Natalie said quietly. I haven't earned your trust. but I'm asking for a chance to earn it. I want to expose what Marcus did. I want every person he hurt to get acknowledgement and compensation, and I want to make sure it never happens again. That's a nice speech. But speeches don't pay mortgages or fix broken careers. You're right. So here's what I'm offering. Natalie slid a document across the table. Full reinstatement with back pay and benefits if you want to return. If you don't want to come back, a settlement package equal to what you would have earned through retirement. And a personal apology from me in writing, acknowledging that your termination was unjust and that you were right about every safety concern you raised. Janet stared at the document, her hands shaking. You're serious. Completely serious. I'm offering the same to everyone in that folder. Come back or don't, but either way, you get acknowledgement and compensation. All I ask is that you're willing to tell your story, to help us build the case against Marcus. He'll destroy you for this. Marcus has connections everywhere. Board members, investors, politicians. You're declaring war on a man who's been untouchable for 20 years. Then maybe it's time someone touched him. Natalie's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I don't care about the political cost. I care about doing what's right. Janet looked at Ethan. Do you believe her? It was the question Ethan had been asking himself for 2 weeks. Did he believe Natalie Pierce? Did he trust that this wasn't just corporate damage control, that she was genuinely committed to change? I think she's trying, he said finally. I think she sees what she did wrong, and she's horrified by it. Is that enough? I don't know. But I'm here because I believe the system needs to change, and she's giving me a chance to change it. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. It's the truth, and the truth is all I've got. Janet was quiet for a long moment, studying the document. Then she picked up a pen from her purse. Where do I sign? By the end of the week, they had 12 former employees willing to testify. 12 voices saying the same thing. Marcus Hale had systematically silenced anyone who threatened his cost-cutting initiatives, regardless of the safety implications. The pattern was undeniable, damning, and Ethan spent his nights organizing it into a report that would be impossible to ignore. He was working late in the conference room on Friday when Natalie appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this. She set 1 cup in front of him, then hesitated. Can I sit? It's your building. That's not what I asked. She sat anyway in the chair across from him. How's it going? It's going. I've documented 32 distinct incidents where Marcus falsified evidence or coerced engineers into signing false reviews. 18 active safety concerns that were buried, including 3 that could have catastrophic consequences if not addressed. He rubbed his eyes, exhausted. This is bigger than I thought. Worse than I thought. I know. I've been reading your updates. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she needed the warmth. I've also been having nightmares about plane crashes, about disasters that could have been prevented if I'd been paying attention. Good. You should have nightmares. That's harsh. You want me to sugarcoat it? To tell you it's okay, you didn't know, you were just following the process? He leaned back in his chair, too tired to filter his words. You signed off on 47 terminations without reading the files. You trusted a corrupt CFO because it was easier than doing your job. People could die because of decisions you approved without thinking. So yeah, you should have nightmares. We all should. Natalie absorbed the hit without flinching. You're right, but here's what I don't understand. Why are you here? Why are you helping me fix this instead of burning it all down? You have enough evidence to go to the FAA, the press, watchdog groups. You could destroy Pierce Dynamics and everything I've built. So why aren't you? Because destroying your company doesn't fix the system. It just creates chaos and puts 1,500 people out of work, most of them good engineers who were just trying to keep their heads down and do their jobs. He took a sip of coffee, bitter and strong. I don't want revenge, Natalie. I want justice. I want Marcus Hale held accountable. I want the engineers who were right to be vindicated. And I want to make sure this never happens again. That requires fixing the system from the inside, not burning it down from the outside. That's remarkably mature of you. Don't mistake pragmatism for forgiveness. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for every engineer who's too scared to speak up because they've seen what happens when you do. I know, but still, thank you. She stood, moved to the wall where he'd posted a timeline of Marcus's corruption. When do we confront him? We don't. Not yet. We need more. We need financial records showing where the money went, proof that his cost-cutting was about more than just efficiency. If we're going to take down a man with 20 years at this company and connections everywhere, we need to be bulletproof. I can get the financial records. I have access to everything. Then get them. But be careful. If Marcus finds out what we're doing before we're ready, he'll destroy evidence and discredit us both. Natalie nodded, then looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? Not now, maybe not for years, but someday? It was the question he'd been avoiding, the one he didn't have an answer to. He thought about Maya's nightmares, about the small apartment that was all he could afford, about the career that would never be fully restored no matter how much Natalie tried to make things right. He thought about 3 years of struggle and shame and starting over. But he also thought about Natalie crying in her hospital bed, about her determination to expose corruption even at cost to herself, about the way she'd spent 2 weeks personally calling every person Marcus had hurt. He thought about the other Maya, the little girl in foster care who believed Natalie was a good person worth defending. I don't know, he said finally. Ask me again when this is over. Fair enough. She moved toward the door, then paused. Maya, my Maya, not yours, asked if she could meet you. She wants to thank you for saving my life. I told her it was up to you, that you might not want to. I don't need to be thanked. It's not for you, it's for her. She needs to see that good people still exist, that doing the right thing matters even when it's hard. Natalie smiled sadly. You showed me that. Maybe you could show her too. Before Ethan could respond, the building's fire alarm erupted in a deafening shriek. Emergency lights flashed. Natalie's head snapped up, confusion turning quickly to concern. That's not a drill. We need to evacuate. They rushed into the hallway, joining the stream of employees heading for the stairs. But something felt wrong. Ethan had responded to enough emergencies to recognize the signs. The smell in the air wasn't quite right, acrid and chemical rather than smoky. And the alarm was coming from only one area of the building. Where's the manufacturing floor from here? He asked Natalie as they descended the stairs. 2 floors down. Why? Because I think that's where the fire is. And if I'm right about what's burning, we've got a serious problem. They reached the manufacturing level and found chaos. Engineers and technicians were evacuating, but someone was screaming about people trapped behind a safety door that had malfunctioned. Smoke was pouring from one of the testing bays, and through the haze, Ethan could see flames. Everyone out! A supervisor was yelling. The sprinkler system's offline for maintenance. Fire department's on the way, but there are people trapped. Ethan was already moving toward the testing bay, his paramedic training overriding common sense. He'd seen enough disasters to know that minutes mattered, that waiting for professionals could mean the difference between rescue and recovery. Ethan, no! Natalie grabbed his arm. You can't go in there. Let the fire department. There's no time. That's a fuel system test rig. If those tanks rupture before they get the fire out, this whole floor goes up. He pulled free from her grip, looking around for something to use. A fire extinguisher on the wall, an emergency axe in a glass case. How many people are trapped? 3, the supervisor said. They were running a stress test when the system overheated. The safety door sealed automatically, but the override isn't responding. 3 people. 3 lives that would be lost if no one acted. Ethan grabbed the extinguisher and the axe, wrapping his jacket around his face to filter the smoke. Where's the door? Through there, but you'll never make it. The heat's too intense, and if those tanks rupture, everyone dies. So I'm going to get them out before that happens. He looked at Natalie, saw terror in her eyes. Call 911. Tell them we have trapped personnel and potential fuel tank rupture. They need to prioritize this over everything else. Ethan, please, don't do this. You already saved my life. You don't have to save everyone. Yeah, I do. It's what I do. He gave her what he hoped was a reassuring smile, though his heart was hammering in his chest. Besides, someone needs to make sure this place doesn't explode before we finish taking down Marcus Hale. He pushed through the smoke before she could argue further, before his own fear could stop him. The heat was immediately intense, like walking into an oven. The testing bay was an inferno. Something had gone catastrophically wrong with the fuel system test, and now the prototype rig was burning with chemical intensity. Through the flames, he could see the safety door, solid steel designed to contain exactly this kind of fire. And behind it, 3 faces pressed against the small window, eyes wide with terror. The door's control panel was melted, useless. The manual override was on the other side of the flames. Ethan had 2 choices: wait for the fire department and hope they arrived before the fuel tanks ruptured, or find another way. He chose the third option. The emergency axe wasn't designed to breach safety doors, but there was a ventilation panel near the ceiling that might be weak enough. Ethan climbed onto a workbench that was already starting to char from the heat, swung the axe at the panel. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th swing, the metal buckled. "Stand back!" he yelled through the gap to the people on the other side. "I'm coming through!" It took 8 more swings to create an opening large enough for a person to fit through. The metal was hot enough to burn even through his jacket-wrapped hands. Smoke was pouring through the gap now, making it hard to breathe, hard to see. But Ethan pulled himself up and through, dropping down into the sealed room on the other side. 3 engineers stared at him like he'd materialized from nowhere. 2 men and a woman, all young, all terrified. "Are any of you injured?" "No, just trapped. The door sealed and we couldn't override it. We thought, don't think, move. We're going back through that vent, and we're doing it now." Ethan pushed the workbench closer to the wall, created a step. "You first." He pointed at the smallest person, the woman. "Climb up and through. Don't think about the heat, just move fast." She did, scrambling through with surprising agility. The first man followed, then the second, leaving Ethan alone in the sealed room. The fire was growing, the heat intensifying. He could hear the fuel tanks beginning to groan under the pressure, metal expanding in ways it wasn't designed to. He had maybe 2 minutes before they ruptured. He pulled himself through the ventilation gap, felt the hot metal sear his forearms even through his jacket, dropped down on the other side into smoke so thick he could barely see. The 3 engineers were already running for the exit, guided by firefighters who'd finally arrived. "Sir, we need to evacuate now!" A firefighter grabbed Ethan's arm, started pulling him towards safety. "The fuel tanks! We know! We're evacuating the entire floor! Move! They ran, through smoke and heat and chaos, following emergency lighting toward the stairwell. Ethan's lungs were burning, his arms screaming in pain from the burns, but he kept moving. Behind them, he heard the first tank rupture with a sound like thunder. The explosion knocked them forward, sent them sprawling in the stairwell. A fireball rolled overhead, flames licking at the ceiling. Then firefighters were pulling them down the stairs, away from the inferno, into the lobby where paramedics were already setting up triage. Ethan collapsed against a wall, coughing so hard he thought his lungs might burst. Someone pressed an oxygen mask to his face. Someone else was cutting away his jacket, exposing the burns on his forearms. Through the chaos, he heard Natalie's voice. "Ethan! Oh God, Ethan, are you okay?" She dropped to her knees beside him, her face streaked with soot and tears. Behind her, Marcus Chen appeared. His paramedic partner had responded to the call. Of course he had. "Ward, you stupid brave idiot!" Marcus was already assessing his injuries with professional efficiency. "Second-degree burns on both forearms, possible smoke inhalation. We need to transport you." "The people I got out?" Ethan managed between coughs. "Safe. All 3 safe because of you." Marcus started an IV line. "You just saved 3 lives while risking your own. Pretty standard Tuesday for you, huh?" "Is everyone out?" He grabbed Marcus's arm. "The whole floor? Everyone's accounted for. You got the last ones." Marcus looked at Natalie. "He's going to be okay, but we need to transport him for observation and treatment." "I'm going with him." Natalie's voice left no room for argument. "No, you're not." Ethan pulled the oxygen mask aside despite Marcus's protests. "You need to stay here, document everything. The fire, the system failure, the malfunctioning safety door. This is evidence, Natalie. This is what happens when you cut corners on safety." "Evidence? Ethan, you almost died. I don't care about evidence right now." "Yes, you do, because this is exactly what I tried to warn Pierce Dynamics about 3 years ago. Compromised systems failing under stress." He started coughing again, couldn't stop. "This is Marcus Hale's legacy. Document it before he can bury it." She stared at him, understanding dawning. The fuel system test rig. It was using the modified design from the PD-7 project. Now you're getting it. Get the evidence before it's destroyed or disappeared. I'll be fine. Marcus replaced the oxygen mask firmly over Ethan's face. No more talking. You're going to the hospital, and you're going to let us treat you like a patient for once instead of trying to save everyone else. As they loaded him onto a stretcher, Ethan caught a glimpse of the building. Smoke pouring from the manufacturing level, firefighters still battling the blaze, employees gathered on the lawn staring at the destruction. And somewhere in there was the evidence that would prove he'd been right all along, that the systems he'd tried to flag were dangerous, that people's lives had been at risk. The universe had a twisted sense of irony. He'd come back to Pierce Dynamics to build a case against corruption, and now the building itself was providing the smoking gun evidence, literally smoking. They transported him to Harborview, full circle back to where this had all started 2 weeks ago. The same hospital where he'd saved Natalie's life, where he'd confronted her about his termination, where everything had changed. Now he was the patient, being wheeled through the same emergency bay where he'd handed off so many victims. The burn treatment was painful but manageable. Second-degree burns on both forearms, as Marcus had diagnosed, plus smoke inhalation that required oxygen therapy. They admitted him for overnight observation, parked him in a room with a view of the city, and told him to rest. He was scrolling through his phone, checking news coverage of the fire, when Natalie appeared in his doorway. She'd cleaned up since the evacuation, changed into fresh clothes, but her eyes were red like she'd been crying. "You saved 3 more lives today," she said without preamble, "and you almost lost your own doing it. They're okay? All treated and released. Minor smoke inhalation, no serious injuries, because you got them out." She moved into the room, pulled up a chair beside his bed. The fire marshal's preliminary report says the fuel system test rig experienced a catastrophic failure, the same type of failure you predicted in your report 3 years ago. So I was right. You were right. About everything. The modified fuel system design, the safety risks, all of it. And if Marcus Hale had listened to you instead of silencing you, 3 people wouldn't have almost died today. Her voice broke. God, Ethan, how many disasters have we been sitting on? How many people have been at risk because I was too arrogant to question my CFO? Hey. He reached out with his less bandaged arm, caught her hand. You're questioning him now. You're fixing it. That counts for something. Does it? Or am I just doing damage control? Trying to save my own reputation before the whole thing comes crashing down? She met his eyes, and he saw genuine anguish there. Tell me the truth. Am I a good person trying to do right, or a bad person trying to look good? It was the question she'd been dancing around for 2 weeks, the one that haunted her. Ethan thought about it, really considered it. The Natalie Pierce who'd signed his termination without reading it, that person had been careless, negligent, more concerned with efficiency than with justice. But the Natalie Pierce sitting beside his hospital bed, crying over people she'd almost lost, determined to expose corruption at any cost. That person was trying to be better. I think you're a person who made terrible mistakes and is trying to fix them. I think you're scared and guilty and working your ass off to make sure those mistakes never happen again. Is that good enough to erase what you did? No. But it's a start. A start, she laughed without humor. I've destroyed 47 careers, risked God knows how many lives, and I'm just at the start. Yeah, that's how redemption works. It's not one grand gesture. It's showing up every day and doing better than you did yesterday. He squeezed her hand. You showed up today. You're documenting the evidence instead of burying it. That's progress. She wiped at her tears with her free hand. Marcus Hale called me while you were being treated, told me the fire was an unfortunate accident and we should move forward quickly with insurance claims and damage control. Didn't even ask about the employees who were trapped. Sounds about right. I told him I wanted a full independent investigation into the fuel system design and any modifications that had been made to testing protocols. He said that wasn't necessary, that it would just invite liability. I said I didn't care about liability, I cared about the truth. She smiled grimly. He's not happy with me right now. Good. Let him be unhappy. Let him make mistakes because he's panicking. Ethan shifted in the bed, trying to get comfortable despite the burns. How much evidence did you get before they sealed off the floor? Everything. Photos, videos, witness statements from the engineers who were running the test. I even pulled the data logs from the test rig before it could lock me out. Marcus is going to try to contain this, but I've got copies of everything stored in 3 separate locations. Smart. Now we wait for the fire marshal's report and the independent investigation. If they confirm what we already know, that the system failed because of Marcus's modifications, we've got him. We've got him, Natalie repeated. God, how did I become the kind of person who has to get her own CFO? How did it come to this? It came to this because you built a company culture where people were afraid to speak up, where profit mattered more than safety, where anyone who rocked the boat got thrown overboard. He said it gently but firmly. You didn't do the corrupt things Marcus did, but you created the environment where he could do them. That's on you, and fixing it is also on you. She absorbed the criticism without flinching. You're right. Again, you're always right, and I'm always having to catch up. Then catch up faster, because we're running out of time. Marcus knows we're investigating him. Today's fire just gave us ammunition, but it also put him on notice. He's going to start covering his tracks, preparing his defense. We need to move before he does. They talked for another hour, planning their next steps. Natalie would push for the independent investigation while Ethan reviewed the test rig data from his hospital bed. They'd reach out to more former employees, build their case bigger and stronger, and they'd be ready when Marcus made his move, because he would make a move. Men like Marcus Hale didn't go down without a fight. After Natalie left, Ethan lay in the hospital bed and stared at the ceiling, his arms throbbing despite the pain medication. He'd almost died today. Again. Seemed like it was becoming a habit, saving Natalie, saving the trapped engineers, putting his own life on the line because that's what heroes did, right? Except he didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired and scared and increasingly aware that he was playing a dangerous game with a dangerous man. Marcus Hale had destroyed 47 careers. What would he do to protect himself now that his crimes were being exposed? His phone buzzed, a text from Maya. Mrs. Rodriguez says you're in the hospital again. Are you okay, Daddy? Did you save more people? He smiled despite everything, typed back, I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a few burns. And yeah, I saved some people. I'll be home tomorrow. You're the best daddy ever. I love you. I love you too, baby. His daughter believed he was a hero. Natalie believed he was helping her become a better person. The 3 engineers he'd saved today believed he was their guardian angel. But Ethan just felt like a man who kept finding himself in impossible situations and refusing to walk away. Maybe that was what being a hero meant, not grand gestures or perfect choices, but showing up when it mattered and doing what needed to be done, even when it cost you everything. He'd saved Natalie Pierce's life 2 weeks ago. Today she'd watched him risk his own life to save others. And somewhere in the overlap of those 2 moments, something had shifted between them. Not forgiveness, he wasn't ready for that. But maybe partnership, maybe the beginning of something that looked like redemption for both of them. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Natalie. Thank you. For today, for everything. You didn't have to come back to Pierce Dynamics. You didn't have to help me. You definitely didn't have to run into a burning building, but you did all of it anyway. I don't deserve your help, but I'm grateful for it. Get some rest. We have work to do tomorrow. Ethan set his phone aside and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, they'd continue building the case against Marcus Hale. Tomorrow, they'd fight for justice and safety and all the things that should have mattered from the beginning. Tomorrow, they'd take one more step toward redemption. But tonight, he just needed to rest, to let his burns heal and his lungs clear and his battered body recover from another impossible choice. He'd saved 4 lives in 2 weeks, Natalie and the 3 engineers. Not bad for a man who'd supposedly lost everything. Maybe he was building something new from the ruins of what he'd lost. Maybe that's what second chances looked like. Not restoring the past, but creating a better future. He fell asleep thinking about Maya's butterfly drawing on his refrigerator, and how sometimes broken things needed to become something completely different before they could fly again. The fire marshal's report arrived 5 days later, and it was even more damning than Ethan had hoped. Catastrophic system failure due to modified fuel injection protocols that operated outside manufacturer specifications. 3 separate safety redundancies that should have prevented the fire had been disabled or circumvented during installation. The testing rig had been a disaster waiting to happen, and it was only luck and Ethan's intervention that had prevented fatalities. Ethan was back in the Pierce Dynamics conference room, his bandaged forearms a constant reminder of how close they'd all come to tragedy, when Natalie walked in with the report and a grim expression. The fire marshal's recommending a full FAA investigation into all Pierce Dynamics engine designs and testing protocols for the past 5 years. They're also flagging potential criminal negligence charges for whoever approved the modifications. She set the report on the table, and Ethan could see her hands shaking. This is it? This is the proof we needed. It's the proof that the modifications were dangerous. We still need to prove Marcus ordered them and knew they were dangerous. Ethan pulled up the financial records Natalie had gotten him access to, spreadsheets showing cost savings from various initiatives. But I think I found the connection. Look at this. He turned his laptop so she could see. A series of payments from Pierce Dynamics to a consulting firm called Apex Solutions, totaling nearly $8 million over 4 years. Payments that corresponded exactly with the timing of various cost-cutting initiatives, including the fuel system modifications. Apex Solutions. I don't recognize that name. Natalie leaned closer, studying the numbers. You wouldn't. It's a shell company, but if you trace the ownership through 3 layers of corporate structures, you end up here. He pulled up another document, a business registration showing the ultimate beneficial owner of Apex Solutions. Marcus Hale and his brother-in-law. He's been paying himself consulting fees for implementing cost-cutting measures. He had a financial incentive to keep cutting corners, and he's been profiting from it personally. Natalie's face went white. That's embezzlement. That's fraud. That's a federal crime. Multiple federal crimes, actually. The embezzlement, the fraud, the falsified safety reports. We're not just talking about wrongful terminations anymore. We're talking about prison time. She sank into a chair looking like she might be sick. I trusted him. For 4 years, I trusted him to manage the company's finances. And he was stealing from us the whole time. He was counting on your trust, on your focus being elsewhere, on you signing documents without reading them. Ethan said it gently, but the point needed to be made. This is what happens when executives don't do their due diligence, when they trust the system more than they trust their own judgment. I know, God, I know. She put her head in her hands. What do we do now? Take this to the board, to the authorities? Both. But we need to be strategic about timing. Marcus has friends on the board. If we go to them first, he'll get tipped off and have time to destroy evidence or flee. We need to go to the FBI first, let them secure the evidence, and then present it to the board as a done deal. The FBI, Jesus. Natalie looked up at him, fear clear in her eyes. This is going to destroy the company. The scandal, the investigation, the lawsuits. Pierce Dynamics might not survive this. Would that be such a bad thing? If the company's foundation is this rotten? There are 1,500 employees who depend on this company for their livelihoods. Good people who had nothing to do with Marcus's corruption. They don't deserve to lose their jobs because of his crimes and my negligence. Ethan thought about that. She was right. There were innocent people who would be hurt if Pierce Dynamics went under. But there were also innocent people who'd be hurt if nothing changed, if the corruption continued, if another system failed and people died. Then we rebuild. We expose the corruption, remove everyone involved, implement real oversight and safety protocols. We make Pierce Dynamics into what it should have been all along, a company that puts safety and integrity first. He met her eyes. But that means you have to be willing to sacrifice everything. Your reputation, your position, maybe even your freedom if the investigation finds you legally culpable for any of this. Are you ready for that? She was quiet for a long moment, and Ethan could see the struggle on her face. This was the moment that would define her, not the speeches or the good intentions, but the actual choice between self-preservation and doing what was right. I'm ready, she said finally. Let's call the FBI. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. FBI agents arrived at Pierce Dynamics with search warrants, seizing computers and documents while shell-shocked employees watched. Marcus Hale was arrested at his home, charged with embezzlement, fraud, and reckless endangerment. His lawyer immediately started spinning a narrative about Marcus being a scapegoat for company-wide failures, but the evidence was too strong, too clear. Natalie held a press conference, standing in front of cameras and reporters, and admitting everything. The corruption, the buried safety concerns, her own negligence in signing documents without proper review. She announced her immediate resignation as CEO, the formation of an independent oversight committee to review all company operations, and a victim compensation fund for everyone who'd been wrongfully terminated. Ethan watched from the back of the room as she faced the hostile questions, the accusations, the demands for accountability. She didn't deflect or make excuses. She stood there and took it, admitting fault, promising change, looking more tired and more human than he'd ever seen her. When it was over, when the reporters finally dispersed and Natalie walked off the stage, she looked like she might collapse. Ethan caught her arm, steadied her. "You did good up there." "I destroyed my father's legacy. I'm probably going to be sued into oblivion, and I just made myself unhireable as a CEO for the rest of my life." She laughed weakly. "But yeah, I told the truth, so that's something. It's everything." He helped her to a chair, got her a bottle of water. "The truth was all that mattered. The rest is just consequences." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one facing lawsuits and professional ruin." "Been there, done that, bought the t-shirt 3 years ago." He sat beside her. "You'll survive this, Natalie. You'll rebuild. Different life, different path, but you'll survive." She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "How do you do it? How do you keep believing in people after everything you've been through?" "I don't believe in people. I believe in choices. You made bad choices 3 years ago. You're making better choices now. That's all any of us can do. Make the next choice a little better than the last one." His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Chen. "Turn on the news. Channel 7. Ethan pulled out his phone, found a live stream. A press conference at the FBI field office. Agents announcing the arrest of Marcus Hale and 3 other Pierce Dynamics executives who'd been part of the corruption scheme. The anchor was calling it one of the largest corporate fraud cases in Seattle history, comparing it to Enron and other massive corporate scandals. "Well," Natalie said softly, watching the screen, "I guess we're famous now. Infamous is more accurate. Is there a difference?" "Not really." They sat together in the empty conference room, watching the news coverage, and Ethan felt the weight of the past 3 weeks finally settling on his shoulders. He'd saved Natalie's life. He'd confronted his past. He'd exposed corruption. He'd nearly died in a fire. And through it all, he'd somehow managed to keep showing up, keep fighting, keep believing that justice mattered, even when it cost everything. "Ethan," Natalie's voice was small, hesitant. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" It was the question she'd asked before, the one he hadn't been able to answer. He thought about it now, really thought about it. Did he forgive her? For signing his termination without reading it? For trusting a corrupt system? For 3 years of struggle and pain? "I don't know if I forgive you," he said honestly, "but I don't hate you anymore. And maybe that's a start." "I'll take it." She smiled through tears. "It's more than I deserve." The board of directors held an emergency meeting that evening, and Natalie attended despite having resigned. They needed her testimony, her evidence, her willingness to stand up and tell the truth about what had happened. Ethan waited outside the boardroom, his bandaged arms crossed, listening to raised voices through the heavy door. When Natalie finally emerged 2 hours later, she looked shell-shocked. "They've accepted my resignation. They're appointing an interim CEO and bringing in a consulting firm to do a complete overhaul of company operations and safety protocols." She leaned against the wall, exhausted. "They also voted to reinstate you. Full reinstatement as a senior systems analyst with back pay, benefits, and a formal apology from the board." Ethan stared at her. "What?" "You were right 3 years ago. The board acknowledges that. They want you back, Ethan. They want you to help rebuild the engineering department, to implement the safety protocols you should have been able to implement the first time." She pushed off the wall, looked at him directly. "They're offering you a position on the new Safety Oversight Committee. Real authority, real budget, real power to make changes. I'm a paramedic now. I have a life, a daughter, a career." "I know. And I'm not asking you to give that up. But maybe you could do both. Consult for Pierce Dynamics, help us build something better, and still do the work that matters to you." She paused. "Or maybe you tell us all to go to hell and walk away. That would be fair too." He should walk away. Should take his vindication and his acknowledgement and leave Pierce Dynamics in his rearview mirror forever. But he thought about the trapped engineers he'd saved from the fire, about the 47 people who'd been wrongfully terminated, about all the future engineers who'd need someone to protect them from the Marcus Hales of the world. "I'll think about it," he said, and saw hope flicker in Natalie's eyes. Over the next few weeks, the investigation expanded. The FAA launched a comprehensive review of all Pierce Dynamics aircraft engine designs. Other former employees came forward with additional evidence of corruption and safety violations. Marcus Hale's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutors weren't interested. They wanted to make an example, to show that corporate executives couldn't sacrifice safety for profit without consequences. Ethan went back to his paramedic shifts, grateful for the simplicity of emergency calls and clear protocols. But he also started consulting with Pierce Dynamics' new interim CEO, a woman named Dr. Sarah Morrison, who'd built her reputation on corporate ethics and safety culture transformation. She listened when Ethan talked, implemented his recommendations, and showed him what real leadership looked like. One evening, 3 weeks after the press conference, Ethan was at home helping Maya with her homework when his doorbell rang. He opened it to find Natalie standing there, holding the hand of a small girl with dark curls and enormous brown eyes. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced," Natalie said nervously, "but Maya really wanted to meet you. She's been asking for weeks." The little girl looked up at Ethan with an expression of awe. "You're the hero who saved Natalie. I'm just a paramedic who did his job." "That's what heroes always say." The girl smiled, gap-toothed and precious. "I'm Maya. I called you that time, remember? To tell you Natalie was good?" "I remember." Ethan knelt down to her level. "You were very brave to call me. I was scared you'd hate her forever. She cries sometimes. At night, when she thinks I'm asleep, she cries about all the people she hurt and how she doesn't know how to fix it." Maya looked at Natalie with fierce protectiveness. "But she's trying really hard. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for a lot." Ethan glanced up at Natalie, saw her struggling not to cry. "Your Natalie is one of the bravest people I know. She made mistakes, but she's owning them. That takes real courage." "Daddy?" His own Maya appeared in the doorway, curious about the visitors. "Who's this?" "This is Maya too, and this is Ms. Pierce." The two girls studied each other with the frank assessment of children. Then his Maya smiled. "Do you want to see my butterfly drawing? It's on the fridge." "I love butterflies." Natalie's Maya lit up, and just like that, the girls disappeared into the apartment, chattering away like old friends. Ethan and Natalie stood in the doorway, watching them go, and he saw something shift in her expression, a softness he hadn't seen before. A glimpse of the person she might have been if she'd never inherited the weight of Pierce Dynamics. "She's a good kid," he said. "She's the best thing in my life. The only thing that kept me going through all of this." Natalie hugged herself, vulnerable in a way she never was at work. Her mother died in a car accident 2 years ago. No other family. She was in foster care when I met her through my father's mentorship foundation. I've been her mentor for 18 months, and I'm in the process of trying to adopt her. Adopt her? It's complicated. The legal process is brutal, and with everything that's happened with Pierce Dynamics, my lawyer says it might be harder now. But I can't give up on her. She needs someone, and Natalie's voice broke. "I need her too. She reminds me how to be human." Ethan thought about his own Maya, about how she'd saved him after the divorce, given him a reason to rebuild. Kids have a way of doing that. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the girls laugh in the kitchen. Then Natalie spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Pierce Safety Trust. I want to establish it formally. A foundation that protects whistleblowers, funds safety research, and provides compensation for people who've been punished for speaking up." She looked at him. "I want you to help me run it, not as an employee, as a partner. Equal say in how the money gets spent, who gets helped, what causes we support." "Natalie, I know you don't trust me yet. I know I have years of work ahead to earn that trust, but this could actually make a difference. We could help people like you, people who tried to do the right thing and got destroyed for it." She pulled out a folder from her bag. I'm putting $50 million of my own money into the foundation. Money from selling my Pierce Dynamics stock, from liquidating my trust fund, everything I have. I'm keeping enough to live on and to support Maya's adoption, but the rest goes here, to fixing what I broke. Ethan took the folder, flipped through the documents. It was all there. The foundation charter, the initial funding commitment, the mission statement about protecting integrity and safety in corporate environments. It was real. It was serious. And it could actually change lives. Why? He asked. Why give up everything? Because I can't buy back my integrity. I can't purchase redemption, but I can maybe prevent someone else from going through what you went through. I can maybe save someone else's career, someone else's family, someone else's life. She met his eyes. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I can spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this second chance you gave me. Before Ethan could respond, both Mayas came running back, his daughter holding a drawing of 2 butterflies flying together, Natalie's Maya holding the butterfly drawing from his fridge. Look, Daddy, we both love butterflies. Can Maya come play again sometime? His daughter's eyes were bright with hope. He looked at the 2 girls, both named Maya, both precious beyond measure. He looked at Natalie, broken and rebuilding, trying so hard to be better. He thought about second chances and redemption and how sometimes the people who hurt you the most could also help you heal if you let them. Yeah, baby, Maya can come play again. His daughter cheered. Natalie's Maya hugged her, and the 2 of them started planning a play date with the enthusiasm only children could muster. Above their heads, Natalie mouthed "thank you" to Ethan, and he saw everything she was trying to say: gratitude for his mercy, hope for the future, acknowledgement of the long road ahead. The foundation, he said, pulling her attention back. I'll help you build it, but I'm not giving up paramedic work, and I'm not pretending we're friends. We're partners in this project, nothing more. That's more than fair. That's more than I hoped for. And you implement every safety recommendation I make for Pierce Dynamics. No exceptions, no compromises, no cost-benefit analyses that prioritize money over lives. Done. Absolutely done. Then I guess we're doing this. He held out his hand, and after a moment she shook it. Not forgiveness, not yet, but partnership, collaboration. 2 broken people trying to build something good from the wreckage of what they'd both lost. The months that followed were transformative. Marcus Hale was convicted on 19 counts of fraud and reckless endangerment, sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. 3 other executives took plea deals in exchange for testimony. The FAA investigation resulted in a complete overhaul of Pierce Dynamics safety protocols and millions in fines, but the company survived thanks to Dr. Morrison's leadership and the credibility Ethan brought as the whistleblower who'd been right all along. The Pierce Safety Trust became operational 6 months after that conversation in Ethan's doorway. They funded legal defense for whistleblowers, provided financial support for engineers who'd been wrongfully terminated, and sponsored research into corporate safety culture. Ethan consulted on cases, using his experience to identify legitimate safety concerns versus manufactured complaints. Natalie handled the fundraising and administration, throwing herself into the work with the same intensity she'd once applied to quarterly earnings. They weren't friends, but they were effective partners, and slowly, grudgingly, Ethan found himself respecting what she'd become. Not forgiving her, that was still too hard, maybe always would be, but acknowledging that she was trying, that she showed up every day and did better than she had the day before. 1 year after the fire, Pierce Dynamics held a ceremony honoring the 3 engineers Ethan had saved. They presented him with a commendation and invited him to speak. He stood at the podium, looking out at faces both familiar and new, and thought about how much had changed. A year ago, I walked into a burning building because 3 people needed help. I didn't think about the risk. I didn't weigh the cost-benefit analysis. I just saw people in danger and knew I had to act. He paused, gathering his thoughts. That's what safety culture should look like. Not calculations about acceptable risk or quarterly profit margins, just a fundamental commitment to protecting human life, even when it's expensive or inconvenient or threatens the bottom line. He saw Natalie in the audience, tears streaming down her face as she listened. Beside her sat both Maya's, his daughter and hers, holding hands like the sisters they'd become over months of playdates and sleepovers. I was fired from this company 3 years ago for trying to protect people. Today I'm being honored for doing the same thing. That change, from punishment to recognition, that's what real safety culture looks like. And it only happened because people were willing to admit mistakes, to tear down broken systems, to rebuild from the ground up. He looked directly at Natalie. It happened because someone chose to be better, even when it cost them everything. The applause was thunderous. Ethan stepped down from the podium and was immediately swarmed by engineers thanking him, telling him their own stories of speaking up and being heard instead of silenced. Dr. Morrison pulled him aside to discuss a new safety oversight position they wanted to create. The 3 engineers he'd saved from the fire presented him with a framed photo of the 4 of them, smiling and alive. Through it all, Natalie hung back, letting others have their moment with him. But when the crowd finally cleared, she approached with both Mayas in tow. "That was a beautiful speech," she said quietly. "It was the truth." "The truth is beautiful." She smiled, tired but genuine. "I have news. The adoption went through. Maya is officially my daughter as of this morning." "Natalie!" The little girl, his little girl now, legally and completely, hugged her fiercely. "I have a mom, a real mom." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Congratulations, both of you. Thank you for everything, for saving my life, for giving me a chance to be better, for helping me become someone worthy of being this amazing kid's mother." Natalie rested her hand on Maya's curly head. "I know I don't deserve this happiness. I know there are 47 people who didn't get their happy endings because of me, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to earn it." "You're doing the work. That's all anyone can ask." His own Maya tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, can we all go celebrate? Like a family?" The word hung in the air between them. Family. They weren't family, not really. Just 2 single parents with daughters who happened to share a name, connected by tragedy and redemption and the complicated work of becoming better people. But maybe that was family too. Not blood or obligation, but choice. The choice to show up, to support each other, to build something new from broken pieces. "Yeah, baby," Ethan said, looking at Natalie and seeing the same tentative hope in her eyes. "We can celebrate together." They went to Maya's favorite pizza place. The 4 of them squeezed into a booth, the girls chattering excitedly about their new sister status, while Ethan and Natalie navigated the awkward small talk of people learning to be friends after being enemies. It wasn't perfect. It was sometimes uncomfortable. But it was real and honest, and maybe that was enough. Over the next year, the awkwardness faded. Natalie started training as an EMT, volunteering alongside Ethan at community health clinics on weekends. She was terrible at it at first, squeamish about blood, uncertain with patients, but she kept showing up, kept learning, kept trying to be useful. Ethan found himself teaching her, correcting her technique, and occasionally laughing at her mistakes in a way that felt almost affectionate. The 2 Mayas became inseparable, spending as much time together as their parents' schedules allowed. Sleepovers became regular occurrences, joint birthday parties, school projects completed together at one kitchen table or the other. They were building something, not a traditional family, but a chosen one, bound by shared experience and mutual commitment to being better. Ethan still worked his paramedic shifts, still saved lives in ambulances racing through Seattle streets. But he also consulted for Pierce Dynamics and the Safety Trust, using his hard-won expertise to protect other engineers from the fate he'd suffered. He testified before Congress about corporate safety culture. He gave talks at engineering schools about the importance of speaking up. He became, despite himself, something of a hero in the safety community. And slowly, so slowly he almost didn't notice it happening, the anger faded. Not completely, he didn't think it ever would completely, but enough that he could look at Natalie and see a person instead of a signature, see someone trying, struggling, showing up day after day to do better. 2 years after saving her life, Ethan was teaching a CPR class at Maya's school. Both Mayas were in the audience, along with their classmates, when he looked up and saw Natalie watching from the doorway. She'd completed her EMT certification 3 months earlier, and she wore her uniform with the same pride he'd once felt in his engineering credentials. After class, she approached him. "The fire department is doing a recruitment drive. They asked if I wanted to apply to the paramedic training program. Are you going to?" "I think so. It seems right, somehow. Spending my life saving people instead of..." instead of what I was doing before. She smiled tentatively. Would that be weird? If we ended up working together sometimes? Probably, but we're already weird. Might as well embrace it. She laughed, and it struck him that he couldn't remember the last time he'd heard her laugh. Not the polite corporate laugh from press conferences, but a real one, unguarded and genuine. Ethan, can I ask you something? She turned serious again. That question I asked you in the hospital, about forgiveness. Can I ask it again? He thought about it. About 3 years of rebuilding, of partnership, of watching her transform from the careless CEO who'd signed his termination to the woman who spent her weekends teaching CPR to underserved communities. About the foundation they'd built together, the lives they'd saved, the systems they'd changed. I think you already know the answer. Do I? You saved 3 people from that fire alongside me last month. You've helped us compensate 47 wrongfully terminated employees. You gave up everything to do what was right. He met her eyes. You've earned redemption, Natalie. Maybe not forgiveness. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive you. But redemption? Yeah, you've earned that. Tears welled in her eyes. Thank you. That means more than you know. Don't thank me. You did the work. I just showed up and watched. You did more than watch. You saved my life. Twice. Once in that ambulance, and once by believing I could be better than I was. The 2 Mayas came running over then, demanding to know if they could demonstrate CPR for their classmates. Natalie wiped her tears and said yes, of course, and together they showed the girls proper hand placement and compression depth. Working together, teaching together, being better together than either could be alone. That night, after dropping his Maya at home and promising Mrs. Rodriguez she'd get a raise for her endless patience, Ethan stood on his small balcony and looked out at Seattle, the same city where his life had fallen apart 3 years ago. The same streets he'd driven through as a paramedic, saving strangers, rebuilding himself piece by piece. His phone buzzed, a text from Natalie. Both Mayas are asleep, just wanted to say thank you again. For everything, for giving me a chance when I didn't deserve it, for being patient while I figured out how to be better, for being the kind of person who saves lives even when it costs you everything. You're a better man than I'll ever be a woman, but I'm going to keep trying. He typed back, You're trying. That's what matters. See you at the clinic this weekend? I'll be there. Someone's got to make sure you don't hog all the hero moments. He smiled at that, pocketed his phone, and went inside. Tomorrow, he had a paramedic shift. Tomorrow, he'd save more lives, teach more classes, continue the work of making sure no one else had to choose between their integrity and their livelihood. Tomorrow, he'd be a hero. Not because he was special, but because he kept showing up. But tonight, he was just a father checking on his sleeping daughter, kissing her forehead, and being grateful for second chances. His own and Natalie's, and the chance they'd both been given to build something good from the ashes of what had been destroyed. 3 years ago, Natalie Pierce had signed a letter that ruined his life. 2 years ago, he'd saved her life in return. And in the time between, they'd both learned that redemption wasn't a destination. It was a direction. A choice to keep moving forward, to keep doing better, to keep believing that broken people could heal if they were willing to do the work. Ethan Ward had been an engineer, then a paramedic, then something harder to define, a bridge between what was broken and what could be repaired. He'd saved Natalie Pierce's life twice, but she'd helped save his too by showing him that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about building a future where the past's mistakes became lessons instead of life sentences. He fell asleep that night thinking about butterflies, about how caterpillars had to completely dissolve before they could transform into something capable of flight, about how sometimes destruction was necessary for rebirth, about how the most beautiful things often came from the hardest changes. And somewhere across Seattle, Natalie Pierce fell asleep in her own apartment, her newly adopted daughter safe in the next room, and dreamed of ambulances and emergency rooms and a future where she saved lives instead of destroying them. Where every 911 call was a chance to be the person Ethan had seen in her that day in the hospital, someone capable of choosing redemption over self-preservation, someone brave enough to be better. They'd both been broken. They'd both rebuilt. And in the space where their brokenness intersected, They'd created something neither could have built alone: a foundation for protecting others, a friendship forged in the fire of their worst mistakes, and a shared understanding that heroes weren't born perfect. They were made in the moments when they chose to save someone, even when every reason said to walk away. Ethan had saved her life. She'd helped him reclaim his purpose. And together, they'd learned that sometimes the people who hurt you the most could also help you heal, if you were both willing to do the work. If you both showed up day after day and chose to be better than you were yesterday. 3 years, 2 saves, and 1 impossible partnership later, they were still choosing, still showing up, still proving that redemption was possible for anyone brave enough to try. And that was enough.